Airline Pilot Guy, episode 153.
Flight 209er, you're clear for takeoff.
Roger.
LA to 123.9.
Roger. Request connected.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 1A in the APG headquarters building in a northern Atlanta suburb. In this episode, tweeted bomb threats, drones or UAVs crashing into the Whitehouse lawn, lipstick knives, electronic cigarettes, and more. So get all settled in. Tray tables and seat backs in their upright and lock positions, electronic devices powered on. Flight 153 is ready for pushback. Hello and welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show. I am Captain Jeff. I am a captain for a major legacy airline here in the United States of America. And I do the show, try to do it once a week, and it's a show about aviation, my little tiny slice of aviation, my perspective as an airline pilot, and mostly focused on airline stuff, because that's pretty much all I know anything about. And do a little bit of news and lots of answering your feedback, your questions. So, now, the last episode, by the way, I got a lot of nice positive feedback with having Dr. Steph as my co-pilot on the last show, and I hope to do more of that in the future. I know that it's kind of boring to hear me talking all the time. So anyway, thank you again, Dr. Steph, if you're listening, for joining me on the last episode. And on the last episode, speaking of, we had Dave from Toronto. He kind of gave us a little bit of a game to play. He sent us a photo of a rocking chair, a white rocking chair in front of what looks like a moving sidewalk, and then a plate glass in the background and a window in the background. And he said, "Where is this?" And let's see, I think Dr. Steph thought it was Philadelphia. I guessed Charlotte, which I thought was kind of ironic because that's where we were recording the show last week. And so I put it out there to you, my listeners, to take a look at the photo and see what you think. And so Ray Williams, my neighbor up in Alpharetta, came in and said, my guess would be Charlotte, North Carolina, Douglas International Airport. And then good friend Haig Martirosian down in Tampa says, the mystery photo of the white rocking chair that you talked about in Airline Pilot Guy episode 152 is easy to solve for those of us who have spent a lot of time connecting on U.S. Airways. It is CLT, Charlotte. For one thing, I've never seen white rockers elsewhere. For another, these are lined up in what is clearly the main concourse between the B and C gate piers, and they back directly onto the long moving sidewalks directly in front of the glass wall looking out onto the field. There are some plantings along that row, and the floor grates indicate that. I recall no rockers or planting in Philadelphia, which is the setting that Dr. Steph suggested. You said BDL2, not sure about that because I've spent little time there, but it just doesn't have the look. There's also a small bit of the lower aft fuselage of an aircraft at the left, so it would need to be on at one of the nearer C gates. That seems to be in the unrepainted U.S. Airways livery. Would that be the old un-American paint job? The location of the red stripe and the color values certainly match. Yeah, I agree, Haig. Those C gates are all U.S. Airways too, so it fits. And I have to say, the rockers are really comfortable. Gotta be CLT, no doubt. Haig Martirosian. And then Dave from Toronto writes in, he said, it's a Charlotte rocking chair. Good guess. And he says, I highly recommend the fried pickles at the barbecue joint in the food court at the Charlotte airport. Regards, Dave from Toronto. So thank you, Dave, for giving us some fun. Maybe we can do more of that kind of thing in the future. And congratulations to Ray Williams and Haig Martirosian. They both guessed correctly. And let's see, I had mentioned a while back that I had purchased the DVD called Flying the Feathered Edge. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot to move my plate that I was using for lunch. Hold on. And the DVD Flying the Feathered Edge, the Bob Hoover project. And I finally got a chance to watch it a few days ago. And it is awesome. It's outstanding. I highly recommend it if you are into, biographies and learning about great aviators like Bob Hoover. A lot of stuff. This man is just amazing. A lot of things that he's experienced in his life. I highly recommend it. Beautiful footage. Harrison Ford and other notables in there are featured. So check it out. Flying the Feathered Edge, the Bob Hoover project. And let's see. Oh, you know what I meant to do? I meant to hold up my coffee mug. I forgot to get my coffee mug. A beautiful coffee mug and some great coffee from our friend Bhavesh. And he came with his wife to the United States, flew into San Francisco, and then went up to Seattle. I think I mentioned it on one of the previous shows, but so he sent me a nice little goodie, and it was a great coffee. Thanks again, Bhavesh and Mrs. Bhavesh, for sending the wonderful Kenyan coffee. I'm not sure if I mentioned this at all either. Tim Van Ram sent me a book, and it's the author Ernest K. Gann, and the title is Band of Brothers. It's a novel. There's Ernest K. Gann on the back here if you're watching the video. And thank you, Tim, for the book. I have not started reading it yet, but I intend to soon. So I'm kind of getting all the gift giving out of the way. Thank you, everyone. And I didn't grab it, but Tim also sent me this little thing. Looks like a wooden nickel. And he said, Jeff, you had mentioned something about doing Airline Pilot Guy or Acme Airlines swag. Stuff we all get, or there are several different definitions of what swag means, but, he's talking about T-shirts, coffee mugs, that kind of thing. I definitely want to do that. And I said, whenever I get to it, or I get around to it. And so he sent me this little wooden, round, looks like a little wooden nickel, and it says TUIT on it. So it is a round to it. So now, I guess now that I have a round to it, I have to get around to it. So speaking of swag and Acme Airlines and Airline Pilot Guy gear, I met with Jim Mercado on a telephone conference, a Skype conference call last Friday, and we went over some design concepts. Jim, that's what he does for a living. His company is called SICEM, SIC-EM, I believe, .com. And he does design projects for like major corporations. And he asked me when I saw him in San Jose for the Airline Pilot Guy meetup in San Jose, hey, he said, would you mind if I played around a little bit with some, designs for some T-shirts and coffee mugs and that kind of thing with the Acme logo? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. So he did, and spent a lot of time, I could tell, on it. And he presented it to me, as I just said, on Friday. And I'm very excited about it. I can't wait for you to see one or more of the designs that he came up with. And I hope to, sometime soon, I hope to get, I already have around to it. I hope to get around to it, printing some T-shirts and coffee mugs that will be available, not for sale, but for a donation, because I am not a business. So I cannot sell you things like that, but I can certainly charge you the cost of my production. How about that? And by the way, it will be my production. I'll be making the screens. I'll be doing the screen printing myself. So it's just something that I'm making in my studio here. I'm not a for-profit business, that's for sure. So anyway, stay tuned for that in the future. And thanks again, Jim, for your awesome design. Maybe I'll put one or two of the designs in the show notes, so check it out. Now it means it is time for this, the Coffee Fund.
Johnny, how much more coffee?
No thanks.
Speaking of donations, by the way, this is the Java Jive sung by the Ink Spots in 1940. And the Coffee Fund is a fund that a mechanism that I have for you to get more involved in the production of the Airline Pilot Guy show. I do have costs, hosting costs, website hosting, media servers, etc. I do drink a lot of coffee. And anyway, if you want to check out the Coffee Fund, head over to airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. And several of you have since the last episode. Let's see, we have David DeGenero, Christopher Revedal, not sure about that, David Bench, James Taylor, Matthew Key, Steve Trumbull. I have Mike Rogers, Gregory Dubin, someone from Mickelson Diamonds, and Larry James. And they all use the classic Coffee Fund mechanism via PayPal. And since the last time, we also have a couple new patrons, patreon.com. And those would be Warwick Pye and Simon Newton. So again, check out airlinepilotguy.com/coffee to find out more about the Airline Pilot Guy Coffee Fund.
I love the Java Jive and it loves me. Coffee and the tea and the Java.
I love the Java and the Java Jive. So thanks again to all of you for your generous contributions. And now it's time for the news. Okay, well, we have to talk about the AirAsia 8501 crash. Not a lot has happened since our last episode when we related the fact that they did find the black boxes, and they divulged that they were getting some data from it, some good data from it, but they were not going to really release a lot of that information to the public. In fact, Indonesia will not publicly release the results of a preliminary investigation into the 28 December 2014 crash. A preliminary report will be produced by late January. We're in late January right now, aren't we? 30 days after the crash, but widespread media reports cite the chairman of the National Transportation Safety Committee as saying that it will not be exposed to the public. This is for the consumption of those countries that are involved, he said. His comments also indicate that the report will not contain any analysis about the crash of Flight QZ-8501, which claimed the lives of 162 passengers and crew. And the only thing that I saw was this little blurb. A crash investigator who wished to remain anonymous said that recordings from the black box in the plane's cockpit revealed several alarms were screaming at the time the pilots were trying to recover and stabilize the plane, including an alarm that indicated that the aircraft was stalling. The investigator from Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee told AFP the pilots' voices were drowned out by the sound of the alarms, which were going off for some time. Radar data showed that the plane was climbing at an abnormally high rate, about 6,000 feet per minute, then dropped rapidly and disappeared. He did not say what caused the plane to climb so rapidly, but the pilots asked to climb from 32,000 feet to 38,000 feet to avoid threatening clouds and were denied permission because of heavy air traffic. No distress signal was received. A preliminary report on the AirAsia accident is expected to be submitted. Okay, we already talked about that. So that is your update on the AirAsia 8501 crash. Hopefully we'll have more information sometime in the future. So there are 2 airplanes heading to Atlanta last week. One, a Delta Airlines flight 1156 from Portland, Oregon, and a Southwest Airlines flight 2462 arriving from Milwaukee. And they received some bomb threats via Twitter, social media bomb threats. And let's see, a Delta spokesperson confirmed one of their planes was involved and that the aircraft was being inspected. 2 NORAD fighter jets escorted the planes as a precautionary measure. An FBI special agent said in Atlanta that both flights were safely on the ground. Earlier, airline officials received a bomb threat and precautions were taken to include the scrambling of military aircraft. They deemed that the threats were credible. Explosive units at Atlanta are now on scene to sweep the aircraft. Of course, this was a few days ago. CBS affiliate WGCL in Atlanta reported that the threats were made on Twitter. The first message sent to Delta at noon Eastern Standard Time. Here's one of the tweets. "I have a bomb on one of your planes, but I forgot which one when I left the airport," one message read. "Can you help me find it?" According to the CBS affiliate, the person claimed to have smuggled the bomb through a back entrance at the airport and placed the bomb on the back of the plane. They also claimed to have a friend in airport security to help them get through. The person ended the series of tweets by threatening more flights if anything were to happen to him or her. Now, I received a lot of you, by the way, sent me links to this story, and James wrote in and said, in light of this incident, a friend and I started talking about how to react. If you're flying over the continental U.S., you probably have a lot more options, but what if you are in the middle of the Pacific? Let's say you're 4 hours away from land and you received a message on your ACARS saying that you have a bomb threat on board. By the way, if you're new to the show, an ACARS stands for Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System. And that's the little digital box that we have that basically is like a digital communication text message kind of a system. So let's say you received a message on your ACAR saying that you have a bomb on board or there's a bomb threat. What would you do? Would you ditch? I mean, getting fighters to scramble would probably be hours away. Would you continue to fly and risk the bomb going off? Or would you even notify your cabin crew? Well, I don't want to go into a lot of details about what we do because we do have procedures that cover these sorts of incidents. And some of them, I'm sure, are classified, so I don't want to get in trouble by saying anything particular about what procedures that we'd use. But I'll just say right now that ditching an airplane in the middle of the Pacific Ocean because you think that the threat might be credible and there may actually be a bomb on board, I don't think would be a very prudent thing to do. I think that in that case you would just continue flying the airplane to the closest airport that you could possibly get to. Time is of an essence, and you'd want to get the thing on the ground at an appropriate location where, bomb crews could take a look and search the airplane and all that kind of stuff. But would definitely not ditch because ditching would be not a sure thing. It would be there would be a good chance that many, many people would die in a ditching. So now, we all know and remember the ditching of the U.S. Airways flight, the Miracle on the Hudson, back a few years ago. That was a successful ditching, but most ditching attempts by large transport-type aircraft don't always turn out so great. So it's my opinion that ditching would not be an option. And that's all I'll say about that because, again, I don't want to go into too much detail about, particular procedures that we might have for dealing with something like that. But I can tell you that if the airlines, Southwest and Delta, and their corporate security departments deemed that that threat was a legitimate threat, then I believe that they had cause for alarm, and they did the right thing. So, well done, Delta and Southwest Airlines. So you probably heard about this. 2 days ago, a small drone crashed at the Whitehouse complex on the front lawn of the White House while the President and the First Lady were in India. An investigation is underway to determine its origin and identify suspects and their motive, according to the Secret Service. It was a quadcopter UAV, or drone, flying at a very low altitude, and it crashed into a tree. Well, this from Gizmodo, just today, I believe. Remember how the White House was in lockdown? No, it was yesterday. A couple of days ago, after a rogue DJI Phantom drone crashed into the lawn. According to the New York Times, the perpetrator was a National Geospatial Intelligence Agency employee who'd been drinking and droning at a nearby apartment, which, hey, it happens. Our tipsy pilot decided to just sort of whistle and walk away from the incident, despite fearing that the drone had flown over the White House. After friends told him about news reports on the drone Monday morning, he decided to contact the authorities, the New York Times reported. The whole thing is particularly ironic, considering that the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is tasked with collecting and analyzing intelligence for the Department of Defense, among other U.S. agencies. The sorts of intelligence one might gather using, say, drones, for instance. And before I go on talking more about drones and stuff, I just want you to know that I am not a drone hater. And I'm trying to find a sound effect that I had set up for this. Here we go.
But I have to be me, and everyone can see your anger is misplaced.
Your anger is misplaced. I'm going to tell you.
Don't hate me because I get attention.
Don't hate me because I get attention.
Don't turn me into what I'm
Don't turn me into what I'm not.
I have to be me 24/7, and I ain't
never gonna stop.
No,
No, don't hate me. I'm not a drone hater.
no.
All right. That is music, by the way, that's free from YouTube, Google YouTube Audio Library or something like that. I like it, actually. Okay, so we have the drone crash, and we also have, before I move on to another incident involving a unmanned aerial system, UAV or drone, which most people like to refer to them. I'd like to go back and revisit one of my new patrons, and he's not expecting me to do this. In fact, he has not given me permission to do this, but I'm hoping that he will not mind. And it's one of my new patrons, Simon Newton. And Simon, I found out, did a little bit of research on. I like to find out about my APG community members and what they do, and why they have an interest in the Airline Pilot Guy community. And Simon has this very cool YouTube site. It's called On the Kitchen Table with Simon Newton, and it's about flying drones. And let you listen to a little bit of his introduction video on his YouTube site, his YouTube channel.
Hello there, welcome to my messy kitchen table. You're seeing this video because you're not currently subscribed to my channel, so I thought I'd just take a little amount of time to see if I could encourage you to subscribe, tell you about what we do here. So my name's Simon. I haven't got years and years of experience flying RC quads. I don't have a fantastic workshop and tool bench with all sorts of exciting and exotic electronic devices. I have a kitchen table, a messy one at that, and I've been messing around with DJI quads for 8 or 9 months now, and the purpose of this channel is to show people that you don't need to be all of those things I just mentioned in order to enjoy this hobby and do some amazing things with it. You just need to have some patience and do a bit of research and have a kitchen table. So we look at product reviews, we have how-to videos, we have some hints and tips. We sometimes push away from the DJI product and look at some other things. We do kit reviews for accessories, and just generally try and have a bit of fun with it all. So if you're not looking for slick video presentation, if you're not looking for very fast-paced editing and a vastly experienced person talking jargon at you, then this could be the right place. So if you'd like to join us for more on the kitchen table videos and the odd glass of red or something else, then please subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again soon here on the kitchen table. Cheers.
Well, thank you. He has a nice glass of red wine or Bordeaux that he's drinking. And Simon, that's awesome. And love your channel. Need to talk to you about some things. You look like you really know what you're doing. I'm not a big, UAV kind of person. Remember, I'm not a drone hater, but I don't have a drone of my own, a UAV of my own. But this looks interesting, and I'm going to subscribe to your channel. And I recommend that the APG listeners check it out and subscribe as well. But anyway, so to tie all this in, I'm trying to tie it all in. We talked about the DJI Phantom. I'm having trouble with my mouth. Crashing into the Whitehouse lawn. And one of the most recent videos that was uploaded on Simon Newton's On the Kitchen Table channel is this. Breaking news. Oh, of course we have an ad.
I have a great relationship with my dad.
Oh, that's wonderful.
He's been...
I'll cut that out, I hope.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the kitchen table. Just a quick audio only update really. DJI have just, in the last half an hour or so, bizarrely via the Wall Street Journal, even more bizarrely it's behind a paywall, so if you can't get hold of the paper version, then you've got to kind of subscribe. Anyway, they've announced that in response to the incident of a drone, which was in fact a Phantom, crashing in on the lawns of the White House, that they are going to release a mandatory firmware update for the Phantom 2, the 2 Vision and the 2 Vision Plus, which will, quote, help users comply with the FAA's Notice to Airmen, which is NOTAM 08326, which restricts unmanned flight around the Washington DC metropolitan area. Firmware is 3.10 and it's coming in the next few days. Now this explains why we have the apps, but DJI have not even mentioned them on their website, or normally the app comes with a firmware update.
Okay, if you want to learn more about the latest firmware, mandatory firmware update from DJI, head over to Simon Newton's great YouTube channel called, again, On the Table. And thank you, Simon, again for contributing to the Airline Pilot Guy show. Hopefully we'll hear from Simon soon. He can send some audio feedback. That would be very cool. So, or maybe video feedback. Okay, so moving on. And again, Simon, I apologize for not asking you if it would be okay for me to play a little snippet of your videos, but I'm sure you don't mind. So here we go. Flights at the busy Dubai International Airport were halted for nearly an hour on Friday because of the recreational use of drones nearby. The official WAM Emirates news agency writes, air traffic was halted in Dubai as a result of malpractices of some members of the public who flew recreational unmanned aerial vehicles. Hey, they didn't call them drones. Cool. In the air navigation passages of planes. Dubai air traffic was suspended from 3 p.m. until 3:55 p.m., so almost an hour, according to the report. Some inbound flights were diverted to Dubai's secondary Al Maktoum International Airport, according to the Emirates news agency. Dubai International has become one of the world's busiest airports, though it was not clear how many flights were affected during the 55-minute disruption. Let's see, Mohammed Abdullah Ali, Director General of Dubai Civil Aviation Authority, issued a warning via the news agency noting the threat to airliners and saying offenders may face punishment even for accidental incursions. These UAVs are strictly prohibited in Dubai airspace for any purpose without a prior permit from the Dubai Civil Aviation Authority, he said in a statement. So another example of people not being smart, flying these UAVs in places where they don't belong and causing consequences. All right, let's move on to this fun piece of information from the TSA. In Milwaukee, the Transportation Safety Administration reported on Instagram on Tuesday, January 20th, that a lipstick knife was discovered in a carry-on bag at Mitchell International Airport. All knives are prohibited, but concealed knives can lead to fines and arrests. Okay, so that was kind of disturbing, I think, finding a what looks like a tube of lipstick, but you take the top off and it's like a 2-inch long knife blade. Not good. Speaking of more threats, the FAA warns of fire danger caused by e-cigarettes on planes. This is from the LA Times. Electronic cigarettes, the hip alternative to smoking to traditional tobacco cigarettes, may pose a fire hazard when they are put in checked luggage on planes. The Federal Aviation Administration has issued a warning to commercial airlines suggesting that they require passengers to put e-cigarettes in carry-on bags only. The ICAO, an agency of the United Nations, issued a similar recommendation in December. The FAA warning cited an incident in August at Boston's Logan Airport where an e-cigarette in a luggage cargo hold of a plane caused a fire that spurred an airplane evacuation on the tarmac. This month, an e-cigarette in a checked bag that had missed its flight from Los Angeles International Airport started a fire in the LAX baggage area. These incidents and several others occurring outside of air transportation have shown that e-cigarettes can overheat and cause fires when the heating element is accidentally activated or left on. If an e-cigarette causes a fire in a carry-on bag, the FAA said that the blaze could be extinguished faster than the same happening in the cargo hold. Airlines for America, the trade group for the nation's airlines, said in a statement that its members will closely review the FAA safety alert. So ALPA, the Airline Pilots Association here in the U.S., has responded to an FAA warning, citing, their response. It's a long-standing, ALPA has a long-standing vocal opposition to the carriage of lithium metal batteries, such as those contained in e-cigarettes in the aircraft cargo hold, and that the advisory statement didn't go far enough, arguing all lithium batteries should be banned from airline cargo holds. USA Today reports that the spokesman for the Tobacco Vapor Electronic Cigarette Association, Ray Story, said e-cigarettes pose no problem when packed correctly, but occasionally irresponsible people will tamper with them or pack them carelessly. There were 25 fire or explosion incidents between 2009 and 2014, and 9 people were injured, usually when the cigarettes were charging. So, got to watch out for those things. It sound like they are dangerous, especially when they're in the cargo holds of airplanes. Moving on, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, calls for better ways to find aircraft accident sites and retrieve critical flight data. They're recommending to the FAA to improve the locator technologies. And let me get into the nitty-gritty details here. Last October, the NTSB held a forum, Emerging Flight Data and Locator Technology, which explored these issues in detail. Among the recommendations are to equip commercial airplanes with a tamper-resistant method to broadcast to a ground station sufficient information to establish the location where an aircraft terminates flight as a result of an accident within 6 nautical miles of the point of impact. The NTSB also called for the FAA to coordinate with other regulatory authorities and the International Civil Aviation Organization to harmonize implementation of several of these recommendations. The NTSB also repeated recommendations for a crash-protected image recording system, read video, that would record the cockpit environment during the last 2 hours of a flight. Okay. Sort of tied into that because we've lost a couple airplanes in incidents that occurred in tropical areas over the equatorial regions. And David Learmount in Flight Global in his blog wrote an article or a blog post, Tropical Accidents, the Evidence is Building, and I included this in one of many tweets that I made in the last week or so. He writes, accidents to aircraft cruising through tropical or subtropical zones are repeating often enough now for the industry to have cause to refresh its pilots on the risks, if they have not already done so. There have only been 3 other accidents in the last 10 years that merit comparison with AirAsia's flight QZ8501 accident over the Java Sea, but maybe that's enough. Now a 4th has been added. These 4 accidents all happened during the cruise in tropical and subtropical zones, or subtropical/subtropical zones. And in all cases, the crews were maneuvering to avoid bad weather. In all 4 cases, control was lost and none of the crews made an emergency call. So, let's see, he ends with, looking back further in accident archives, accidents with this combination of circumstances didn't happen, although flights in those days were just as likely to have to fly through the tropics as they are now. Tropical weather seems to be a modern accident trigger, rather in the same way that loss of control in flight is now accepted by ICAO as the greatest aviation risk to life, when before the 1990s it was not. So, he goes on to talk about the coffin corner, etc., and some good conversation in the comments as well. Kind of tied into this, responding to reading this article via my tweet, Gary Altman wrote, another commonality to all 4 accidents is no dispatchers were involved to pre-plan around the weather. So that's an interesting point. Thank you, Gary, for making it. And talking about the comments to this article, which I'll have in the show notes, you'll recognize at least one of the commenters, Mr. David Connolly, who is a sometime listener to the Airline Pilot Guy podcast, although he is a vocal opponent of my very long format. He doesn't like, he said some very unkind but very comical things about the length of my shows, but he seems to be in the minority. So anyway, so check it out. I'll have the link to the article by David Learmount, Tropical Accidents, the Evidence is Building, in the show notes for today's show. Okay, moving on. Oh, this is the so sad segment of this show. So sad. It's a sad situation. It's getting more and more absurd. Speaking of absurd, you know that magazine that we all grabbed that was in that seat back pocket in front of us before the days of cell phones and tablets and laptop computers and such that we now use to pass the time on an airplane flight. Well, back before those days, we'd grab the magazine, the in-flight magazine, Sky magazine, whatever, or perhaps grab the Sky Mall magazine and look at the in-flight catalog for interesting things to buy. Well, apparently everybody is so enthralled with their smartphones and Wi-Fi systems on the airplanes that they're not bothering to look at Sky Mall anymore, and they have filed for bankruptcy protection. And after 25 years of selling quirky products like a Darth Vader toaster or a paper towel holder with USB ports, SkyMall LLC is seeking a court-supervised sale of its assets, according to papers filed Thursday with the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in Phoenix. That was last Thursday. We're extremely disappointed in this result and are hopeful that SkyMall and the iconic SkyMall brand find a home to continue to operate. The company, which started in 1989, fully suspended its retail catalog operation January 16th and laid off 47 of its 137 employees. Let's see, SkyMall's parent company, Exhibit Corporation, which acquired the business in 2013, is also seeking Chapter 11 protection. So if you want to read more about this, I'll have a link in the show notes. But I think that it is really sad that we're not going to have SkyMall to make fun of anymore. This from the Huffington Post. 10 things you can do during takeoff now that SkyMall is bankrupt. Number 1, sleep. 2, read a legitimate magazine. 3, better yet, read a book. Yes, they still exist. Number 4, shop on your phone if the Wi-Fi is functioning. 5, talk to the person next to you. 6, feign indigence in an effort to score free chips. That's an odd one. 7, look out the window. Yeah, that should be number 1. 8, count the seconds until the seatbelt sign turns off. Caution, there may be a lot of seconds. 9, review the safety pamphlet. Yeah, that should be higher up on the list, I think. And number 10, do absolutely nothing differently. Who are we kidding? You never read SkyMall anyway. Oh, so sorry to see you go, SkyMall. Rest in peace. And here's another sad piece of information. You remember me talking about the reemergence of the low-cost carrier People Express. Well, they started in, I think, May or June of last year, and then they abruptly stopped because they were having trouble finding pilots and airplanes to fly. I guess they're contracting out to another company to fly their flights for them. And apparently they're still, and they said that they were going to be back in October or September, something like that. And that came and went with nothing said. Their headquarters are at the Newport News Williamsburg International Airport. And the authority there basically just kicked them out. They said that they want them to vacate the property because they're way behind, like $18,000 behind on its utility bills. And this is after they had already evicted them from the ticket counter area. People Express owed more than $100,000 in airport fees that the carrier had already collected from passengers. So things are not going well for People Express, although a spokesperson said that they're still hopeful that they'll get the airline back on track sometime soon. So we'll see. And you can probably hear my bird, Cedric, upstairs above me. He is excited about something. Okay, and finally, it's a long news section today, isn't it? This is from the great site NYC Aviation, and Ben Granucci, the standards editor, who is an aviation enthusiast and plane spotter based in New York City. And I think he's also a dispatcher for a major airline. But anyway, he writes, if you have followed NYC Aviation for a while, you have probably realized that we have somewhat of an obsession with the airplane Solar Impulse. The solar-powered aircraft project has been steadily gaining attention over the past several years as it traveled around Europe to North Africa and finally across North America last year. The greatest feat for the Solar Impulse project, however, is only just about to begin, an attempt to fly around the world. Scheduled to take place later this year, this new goal required an entirely new aircraft. As a result, the original Solar Impulse aircraft, registered HB-SIA, has been retired. In its place is a new, larger, and more powerful aircraft, HB-SIB. The new aircraft, dubbed Solar Impulse 2, will be capable of flying the transoceanic distances required for a flight around the world. These distances will take the slow-moving Solar Impulse several days to cover. So, again, I'll put this blog post in the show notes if you want to read more details and see some great graphics about the planned routing of the flight. And some of these legs that they're going to have to fly are quite long. The first oceanic flight of the journey is a roughly 900-mile flight across the Gulf of Oman to Sardar, I can't pronounce that second word, in Ahmedabad, India. And then one of the segments, the very longest segment, will be the one to fly across the Pacific Ocean at 5,100 miles. And this thing does not fly very fast, so it's going to be a long journey. I think they said it would be something like 5 months long or something. I don't know. So we'll keep our eyes and ears open on developments on the Solar Impulse round-the-world flight. I think they're going to try to start it late next month or early March. So there you go. That is it for the news. And now it's time. Hold your ears.
Captain, incoming message.
Thank you. Now we'll start with some audio feedback from Lee. Here we go.
Hey, Captain Jeff. I was listening to your last episode, and Tom had left feedback about the 747, the book he had just listened to by Joe Sutter, who was the lead engineer on in the 1960s for Boeing on the 747 project, commenting on all the redundancies that have been built into the 747, which were new at the time, and how those are still helping the aircraft in situations like what happened a few weeks ago or pretty recently with the one that had to land without one of its main landing gear. So I coincidentally had also actually on Audible listened to the book just in December, and what struck me had to do with Boeing's supersonic transport, and I'd been meaning to leave some feedback because it seems to me a few episodes ago someone else had left feedback about wondering why we don't have all kinds of supersonic transports flying across the skies. And in the book on the 747, what's really pretty amazing and kind of funny is that Joe Sutter said that he was really picked to lead up the 747 project mainly because all the real hotshot engineers were busy for most of the 1960s on the more glamorous Boeing 2707 supersonic transport project, which pretty much lasted an entire decade before going down in flames in the early 70s, so to speak, when Congress, the U.S. Congress, who'd been funding about 3/4 of the program, decided to defund the project, I think in 1971, leading to, for among other reasons, at Boeing, layoffs of about 50,000 jobs. Not all, of course, because of the Boeing 2707, but certainly a large number of layoffs at Boeing because of that. Apparently, Boeing in the 1960s kind of was envisioning an era of supersonic transports coming by the 1980s or the end of the 20th century, and thought really was devoting most of its resources into planning for this Boeing 2707, which was going to be far more ambitious than the Concorde, would be able to cruise at Mach 3 and also hold like 250 to 300 passengers, whereas I think the Concorde really just held around 100 passengers, and it certainly wasn't Mach 3. But at any rate, they kind of thought the 747 was just kind of a stopgap airplane that would kind of tie the airlines over until, all the new supersonic transports would be introduced. So really one of the most iconic and, easily recognizable airplanes, arguably of all time, was kind of, second shrift to kind of this mythical airplane that never came into being because of prohibitive issues with cost and noise and pollution, although I think mainly cost was the biggest thing. So Joe Sutter probably had the last laugh on all his supposedly superior engineers at Boeing, because he went on to be the father of the most iconic airplane of all time, and the Boeing 2707, although I think they said they built 2 mock-ups of it. Never, the whole program was canceled in 1971 after nearly 10 years of study and work. So I thought, at any rate, I just thought it was worth reading the book just to find out that that the 747 had a very inauspicious beginning. So I thought I'd share that with all the APG listeners, and I strongly do recommend that book as well, which is called 747, Creating the World's First Jumbo Jet and Other Adventures from a Life in Aviation by Joe Sutter, who incidentally, it appears if is still alive, even though he's in his, or not even though, he seems to be in his 90s and still up there in Seattle. And recently Boeing's named some facilities after him at their manufacturing complexes in Seattle, so I guess that's a nice note for him, a nice way to end his life. So at any rate, hope everyone found that interesting. I hope things have been going well for you with winter travel. I'm here in the Northeast and northeastern U.S., and it's just been cold with no snow, so I imagine wouldn't be too different. You would be fine with those conditions, although I guess in other parts of the country maybe it's been a little bit worse. So hope all is well. You have a fabulous podcast, and I look forward to it every week. And happy flying. Cheers.
Well, thank you, Lee Hayden, and I do appreciate your feedback and your support as well. And so that's another great recommendation for Joe Sutter's book, 747, Creating the World's First Jumbo Jet and Other Adventures from a Life in Aviation. I think it's also an audiobook as well. I might just have to pick that up and listen to, I don't know who reads it, but so it sounds like Joe was working on the 747 when all the cool kids were working on that 2707 SST, but Joe had the final word, as you say. So thanks again, Lee, for your feedback. Do appreciate it. Nick Carson writes, "Hi again, Captain Jeff. Here are some questions for you from my last long-winded feedback. I know you may not know much of the B737 as a whole, but the knowledge you do have about it, do you believe that flights I did, which are Kennedy to San Jose to Honolulu to Hilo to Honolulu to Hilo to Honolulu to San Jose to Atlanta, was a good set of flights for the airplane?" Yeah, sure, from what I know. I think that the San Jose to Honolulu and back segments are kind of pushing it for a 737, but I do believe that they actually do use that airplane for that route, which was unheard of not that many years ago. I mean, you would not fly an airplane, a small 737 twin jet, on that kind of flight segment, but reliability of engines these days and ETOPS and all that kind of stuff has allowed that to happen. And in the old days, it was always a big jumbo jet with 3 or 4 engines flying those kind of routes. Number 2, if you had to change or edit the route at all, what would you do? I apologize for the sound effects in the background here, if you can hear them. I know I can. What would I do? No, I wouldn't change anything. That looks like a good route to me. If you could do any legs of what I did, what would it be? I'd have to say the short little island hopping legs, which looked the most interesting to me. And lastly, would you be based in Hawaii and all you do is these shuttle flights, or would that be uninteresting to you? I don't know. Hawaii is a beautiful place, paradise and all. But I think I get tired of that beautiful weather. It's kind of funny to say, but I think I get tired of that same weather every day of the year, just about all year round. I like seasons. That's why I like living in Atlanta or the Atlanta area. We actually have winter, spring, summer, and autumn, and the associated great things and not so great things about each of those seasons. And I like that kind of rhythm of nature and climate change. So I think I'd get bored in having to live in Hawaii. Now, I know a lot of you would probably say, "Are you crazy?" I'd do that in a minute. So thank you, Nick, for your feedback. Paul sent in some audio feedback. Let's hear what Paul Thorpe has to say.
Hello, Captain Jeff. Hello, listeners. This is Paul over in the UK. I'm currently piloting my ground-based craft, which is where I listen to the podcasts. As a result, I'd just like to feedback on the feedback bumpers. I like them keeping me awake. It's a good thing when you're driving. Anyway, on to my question. You commented in the current episode, which I think would be 151, around pilots flying at cruise and how whoever's flying the aircraft is flying the aircraft. Now, the question I have, and I have had for a while, but what I always tend to do is I think, I'll get home and record it in the peace and quiet, and then life takes over and I just forget. So I'm decided to bite the bullet and record in the car. So anyway, my question is, what is the fundamental difference in the not so much the responsibilities, the difference between the job of the pilot and the first officer? Because I've heard you in the past talk about the external inspection being the official duty of the first officer, but sometimes the captain will do it. And then I've also heard you talk about the pilot flying is doing the flying and the pilot monitoring is monitoring what's going on, which basically to me would suggest that the two jobs are interchangeable. I was just wondering what the actual fundamental differences there were in terms of the jobs. Obviously the captain has overall responsibility, but I guess on a standard day-to-day flight, depending on who's flying the leg, the jobs could be essentially the same and interchangeable, particularly when in the event of the captain becoming incapacitated, the first officer is expected to take over and perform the duties of the captain. So essentially he has to be able to do the captain's job. So what's the difference between the two jobs? Is there any difference? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for your feedback. And so it is kind of confusing, I would say, because we hear terms kind of thrown about a lot when it comes to airline crew members. So we have captain and first officer. Sometimes we hear pilot and co-pilot. And then you sometimes hear those mixed, like the captain and the co-pilot, or the pilot and the first officer. Now, those names are basically designations of position. And then the pilot flying and the pilot monitoring are actually roles that we play. So let's see. So a position refers to a status of an individual. May also refer to a rank of an individual in an organization or society. This is from a dictionary site. A role refers to a prescribed or expected behavior. So let's start with the position aspect of this whole thing. Captain and first officer, or pilot and co-pilot, if you'd like. Now, I think that Patrick Smith, a fellow airline pilot and the author of Ask the Pilot blog, and he also wrote a book that you've probably seen at the bookstore, I think called Cockpit Chronicles. He wrote about a year ago this post, and he addresses it to the Associated Press. Dear Associated Press and most other media outlets, there are always at least two pilots in a jetliner cockpit, a captain and first officer, and both of these individuals are fully qualified to operate the aircraft. The first officer is known colloquially as the co-pilot, But a co-pilot is not an apprentice. He or she shares flying duties with the captain more or less equally. The captain is officially in charge and earns a larger paycheck to accompany that responsibility. But both are capable of flying the aircraft. Co-pilots perform just as many takeoffs and landings as captains do, and both are part of the decision-making process. And that is all true. I agree with you, Patrick. He continues, use of the term pilot to describe the captain suggests that the first officer is by definition something other than, and presumably less than, an actual pilot. This is simply false. I'm not sure if reporters have a style guide for these things, but normally this is nothing a simple S can't fix. In other words, the pilots. Alternatively, you could say the cockpit crew. If a differentiation is needed, I'd recommend using the terms captain and first officer. Just be aware that either pilot may be at the controls during a particular incident. In fact, while protocols are different carrier to carrier, it's not unusual during emergencies or other abnormal situations for the captain to delegate hands-on flying duties to the co-pilot so that the captain can concentrate on communications, troubleshooting, coordinating the checklists, etc. Patrick continues, a co-pilot becomes a captain not by virtue of skill or experience, but rather when his or her seniority standing allows it. And not every co-pilot wants to become a captain right away. Airline seniority bidding is a complicated thing, but suffice it to say, a pilot can often have a more comfortable quality of life, salary, aircraft assignment, schedule, and choice of destinations as a senior co-pilot than as a junior captain. Thus, it's not terribly uncommon for the co-pilot to be older and more experienced than the captain sitting next to him. It varies country to country, airline to airline, but in the U.S., captains wear 4 stripes on their sleeves and epaulets. Co-pilots wear 3. Okay, so that's just a little excerpt of that post from Patrick Smith and the Ask the Pilot blog. So that's dealing with mainly with the positions of captain and first officer. Now, the role as far as pilot flying and pilot monitoring, or we abbreviate it PF or PM, can be played or exercised by either captain or first officer. And so what we do normally is alternate, or sometimes if you're flying an airplane as I do, where you're going in and out of a certain hub city like Atlanta or New York or whatever, you may choose to do pairs. Like, for instance, I'll do this a lot. If we're flying a trip where you go from Atlanta to New York and then back to Atlanta and then to Kansas City for an overnight, and then the next day Kansas City back to Atlanta and then to Memphis and then back to, that kind of thing. Instead of alternating every other leg as pilot flying and pilot monitoring, I like to do, I'll tell you what, I'll do the Atlanta, New York, back to Atlanta segment, and then you can do the Kansas City pair, and then I'll do the Memphis pair, and then you can do the Charleston pair, so that the co-pilot or first officer can see more than just the hub city of Atlanta or whatever your hub city is. So because it's nice for your experience to experience other airports other than just your home airport. So when it's my leg, I am the pilot flying. My co-pilot would be the pilot monitoring. And these roles have certain responsibilities and obligations, etc. Generally, the pilot flying does the loading of the flight management system and flies the airplane. And the pilot monitoring kind of backs up and double checks the routing and other items that we put in the flight management computer, and also talks on the radio while the other pilot flies. And there are all kinds of roles that are kind of interchangeable there, and it varies from airline to airline and country to country, but that's generally the gist of how it works. Now, there are some things that are always assigned to a certain crew member, such as in most of the airplanes that we fly at Acme, the taxiing on the ground is the responsibility of the captain. mainly because most of the airplanes that we fly at Acme only have the steering, the nose wheel steering tiller or steering wheel on the left side of the cockpit where the captain sits. So it would be difficult for the first officer to taxi the airplane. Now, there are some airplanes out there that have steering tillers or steering devices on their side, on the first officer's side as well. But in most cases, it's only on the captain's side. And so that becomes the responsibility on every flight for the captain, taxiing out and taxiing in. And likewise, in those situations, the first officer is always the one communicating to ground control or using the, communicating via the radio on the ground. So whether it was the first officer's leg or not, as you're taxiing out, he is talking on the radio, and when you're taxiing in, he or she is talking on the radio. Again, that could vary, based on different airlines and such. Like, for instance, Paul, the example that you used about, at least at Acme Airlines, the responsibility of the first officer is to do the external pre-flight inspection, the walk-around. That doesn't mean that the captain can't say, like myself, that, hey, it's a beautiful day, it's your leg, I'm going to go ahead and go outside and do the walk-around. So I can do that if I want to. But our book says that it is the first officer's responsibility to do that. So, but that, again, varies among airline to airline and country to country, most likely. So I hope that clarifies and it didn't muddy the water or muddy the matter on the difference between positions and roles that we exercise as pilots, because we're all pilots. So probably the best way to refer to the cockpit crew would be the captain and the first officer, and sometimes the second officer if there's a flight engineer position. And then pilot monitoring and pilot flying for whoever happens to be, doing that particular leg. If that did not sufficiently describe or answer your question, Paul, please feel free to follow up. All right, some more audio feedback. This from Bruce.
Hi, Captain Jeff. This is Bruce from Eugene, Oregon again. Hey, first of all, I just wanted to mention, after trying to make a couple of bumpers for the feedback section, I realized it's really not that easy. And so maybe with the one you already have, the best thing to do is just to apply something that we'll call volume attenuation. And maybe if you're not playing it too loud, I can drift away in my restful slumber as I'm going to sleep when that comes on, and it won't jar me out of that blissful state.
Captain, incoming message.
Sorry,
thanks,
I had to do that.
Thanks for your consideration there. And the other thing I was going to ask you was, on the AirAsia, I've seen the new information that came out where they're saying it was climbing at 6,000 feet a minute right there at the end. I guess the question is, one of three things. You think he was trying to push it that hard right at the end to get over, some clouds or something right there at the end? Or was it a violent updraft? Maybe a combination of the two? And also, possibly, there was icing in those clouds. The pitot tube got plugged up like what happened on Flight 447. And then he was in a situation with all kinds of erratic readings and not able to figure out what to do to recover before they hit the ocean. Anyway, that you may have already covered, but I think like everyone else, we really appreciate your show and what you're doing. And so thanks for everything, and we'll talk to you next time.
Well, Bruce, thank you for being such a good sport, again, with the whole feedback bumper thing. And we did have a lot of fun with it, but now, as he says in his post here, now let's see if we can put this issue to rest, so to speak. He doesn't see the humor in it anymore. So Bruce, Yeah, thanks for your comments about the AirAsia 8501. It's still a lot of speculation because we still have not been given the actual data from the flight data recorder or have been able to listen to the cockpit voice recorder as the public. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, we may never get to see it, or if we do, it's going to be probably quite some time. But I think it's fair to say that this incident or accident does bear quite a bit of resemblance to the Air France 447. I will say that when you get into some severe thunderstorm or convective activity, it is possible to experience some pretty violent updrafts and downdrafts. But 6,000 feet per minute, I think, just on its own, without any other action by the crew or the autopilot system, I think is very unlikely. I think it may be, as you suspect, maybe a combination of the two, a maneuver by the crew or autopilot system, or demand by the crew, and then perhaps a pretty strong updraft. I don't know. It's all speculation, and I really hate to speculate because usually when I speculate on things, I'm wrong. So I'll refrain as best I can, but it certainly has the earmarks of the same type of situation that we saw with Air France 447. And again, please do read the aforementioned article by David Learmount from Flight Global, his blog. Again, I'll have that it should be in the show notes somewhere there in the news section. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully we'll get some more information about this flight sometime soon. Jorge in Mexico City writes, "Hello, Captain Jeff. I was reading some news on the internet this afternoon. I saw an article that does not surprise me, but certainly didn't see it coming. It turns out that our drug dealers just found a new way to send drugs from Tijuana, Mexico, to the United States. Yes, drones, UAVs. They pack them up and throw them to your side of the border. But this time they abused their little delivery system, or they abused it, and it fell like a brick on a parking lot next to a mall. Just until this happened, Mexican authorities realized they needed to figure out some kind of regulation for this kind of aircraft. Seems like the drone problem is causing headaches all over the world and now helping drug dealers out. What's next?" Thank you, Jorge, for your comments. And he has a picture of this drone with its package of illicit narcotics strapped to it and spewed all over the parking lot. Coasty Jim, he calls himself. "First, I thoroughly enjoyed the podcast. Thanks so much. It was recommended to me a couple of months ago by a good friend, and I've stayed up to date since, although I think I'm a little late to the game to go back and listen to all of them." Yeah, don't bother, Coasty. Just keep listening from here on. As for my question, if you've addressed it before and I've missed it, my apologies, and I have. But I was wondering if you could speak how the airline pilot career has been for your family life. As a military pilot with about 8 years of active duty, the airline route is always one of the options that I've considered pursuing after my commitment is up. But the biggest deterrent to me has been what I understand as a lot of time away from home in large chunks. I have a 1-year-old little girl, and Lord willing, my wife and I hope to have more children, and spending 4 to 5 days or more away from home and family at a time seems like quite a strain on my wife and home life in general. Listening to your podcast, you certainly seem to be a dedicated husband and father, and I was wondering how that schedule has impacted your family life over the years. Could you speak to how your wife felt about it, especially raising young children? I assume it was worse when you were a junior with much less seniority than you have now. Has that gotten easier? Does the time spent at home far outweigh the cost of time spent away, in your opinion? Or has this not really ever been an issue for your family? Thank you for your thoughts. I look forward to hearing your opinion and experience. God bless. Coasty Jim in Falmouth, Mass. I hope that you're digging out from the snow. And by the way, the first feedback person, Lee, mentioned in his feedback, because he sent it to me more than a week ago. He sent it to me like 9 days ago, and he said that they had yet to have any snow in the Northeast. I'll bet he has some snow now. They just had that big blizzard that hit New England the last couple days. Anyway, so I have addressed this in the past, but it always bears repeating. The lifestyle of an airline pilot is pretty variable. It is possible, although it's difficult to do when you first start off flying, but it is possible that you can fly trips that don't go overnight. You just fly day-long trips, although they don't really have a lot of them at Acme Airlines these days. It's mostly 3-day trips, but there are a couple 1- and 2-day trips. So you'll be away from your family perhaps just for the day or overnight. But more characteristic of most of the trips these days, at least on the airplane that I fly, which is short, medium range kind of flying, from Atlanta to New York, Boston, Chicago, Minneapolis, sometimes heading out to the West Coast. But the flights that I fly on my airplane are on average about an hour and a half in length. And so the trips are built so that they aren't like super long trips, like some of the international trips can be very long trips. It's not unusual for some of the international trips to be 7 to 10 days long. There is a trip on one of the categories of airplanes that basically flies to the Far East, or are we? We're not supposed to say that anymore, are we? The Asian continent, and then basically they fly in and out of one of the Far Eastern or the Asian hubs for the rest of the trip, in and out, kind of shorter segment trips. And then they head back and fly a very long flight all the way back to the States. And those can be like 12 days long. The advantage of a trip like that is that when you're home, you're home 24/7. And probably going to be home for the rest of the month. So if you've just flown 12 days, you're going to have probably the next 18 days or more off. So that's, some people would consider an advantage to that kind of flying. The kind of flying that I do is basically a 3 or 4 day trip every week, and I'm senior enough to have my weekends off. There's so many variables with this, really, honestly. It depends on the airline. It depends on the type of airplanes that the airline's flying. It depends on your seniority within that airline. But if there's a will, there's a way. You can make it happen so that you end up flying an airplane or a category where the trips are shorter, and you kind of arrange your schedule as best you can, depending on your seniority, to be home as much as you can. But I think the key thing, at least for me, and this is anecdotal experience, is it depends on your wife. You asked, what my wife thought about all this, and my wife is very independent. I mean, I was in the Air Force before I got into the airlines, and I flew basically airline-type flying when I was in the military, when I was flying the C-141. And those trips were on average about 5 to 7 days long. We flew out to the Pacific. So she learned right off the bat how to fend for herself, and she has always been a very independently minded person anyway. Like, you don't need to do that for me. I can do it myself. So she's very strong-willed in that way. Which is an asset for being the spouse of somebody who has the kind of job that I have. So that's one thing. If your wife is or your spouse is very dependent upon you to do a lot of the things, or can't live without you for a few days at a time, then I'd say, I don't know, maybe the airline pilot lifestyle is not for you and your family. The other thing is that when you are home from a trip, make that time at home count for something. So if your wife has been doing absolutely everything, which you'll have to do while you're gone, then step it up and do some things like help make dinner, take over the driving duties. That's what I did a lot when my kids were younger. I knew that my wife was the one that was driving, all across town and for all the extracurricular activities and everything. And I basically said, okay, I got it. You concentrate on whatever you need to concentrate, which is a lot. and I'll be at least the chauffeur, and I'll do as much as I can. So, again, those roles vary amongst individual families, and they're, everybody's a little bit different. But the thing that I was always amazed by, in a negative way, was some of these old school guys that I was flying with when I was a second officer and a first officer, and listening to some of these captains who are gone for most of the week, and then they come home, and then they are gone from their families a lot of time playing golf and doing all these other things. I'm thinking, wow, don't you want to try to help with things around the house, So I think that's the wrong way to do it, and I think that and I hate to use the term quality time, but if you don't have the quantity of time at home, make it quality time. And that would be my recommendation. But again, there are so many variables, Jim, that I really can't say, oh yeah, this is going to work for you and your particular family situation, or it's not going to work for you and your particular family situation. And finally, regarding family life and this kind of career, I would be fooling myself if I said that it didn't have some effect on things in my own family. And, I wish that I had been able to be home for every birthday and every holiday. But when I was younger and less senior, I many times wasn't. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to impact our relationships with each other as time goes on. I just hope that, everything works out. But I'm sure that it's not all good. And so, sometimes you have to take the bad with the good. And it is different now that my children are basically all adults. One is, on her own, basically, even though she's still living with us, a school teacher. But that'll change probably in the near future as far as, her living with us and being on her own. My son is in his third year of college, and I'm sure that he'll be on his own when he graduates from college. And then my youngest, she's 18, and she's about to graduate from high school, and she's going to be going off to college. So living in a household now when we're all adults and we're all kind of responsible for our own transportation and our own lives, it's different. It's a different dynamic than it was when they were, 2 years old and 5 years old and, 10 years old, and all the school activities and everything else. So it's just different. So I hope that helped. I don't know. We'll see. But that's all I can say about that. It's really what you make of it and the effort you put into it. Okay, let's hear some more audio feedback, this time from Tyler.
Hey Cam Jeff, this is Tyler, the flight attendant. Just wanted to ask you a quick question regarding NextGen, the NextGen ATC program that's been put in place at numerous airports across the country, including the Dallas-Fort Worth airport where I am based. I still don't understand NextGen fully. I wanted to see if you had any insight that could help me maybe understand it just a little bit better. It has been implemented in Dallas, as I said before. I have noticed a slight decrease in ATC delays when it comes to the departures and arrivals. Sometimes, actually a lot of times in the past, we would have to do holding patterns on our way into Dallas at certain times of the day, or maybe when we leave the gate, there was a lot of delay getting out to the runway, or when they changed runways, there was quite a lot of ATC delay that would cause us to run behind schedule a little bit in Dallas. But as of late, I haven't had any of those past problems, so I wonder if that was contributed to NextGen at all on the ground, or if NextGen was strictly just in the air. But anyways, just wanted to see if you could help me maybe understand NextGen a little bit, what your experiences with NextGen have been, and if you have any cool insight on that as an airline pilot. I really appreciate your help. Love the show as usual. Hope to hear from you soon. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, buddy.
Well, thank you, Tyler. And how about right now? You're here for me. Thank you for taking the time to send in the audio feedback. It's always appreciated. Okay, NextGen. NextGen promises less congestion and smoother flows of traffic, etc. As far as your anecdotal experience as far as in the past few years where it seems like there are fewer gate holds and less holding, etc. I think that you could probably, maybe a small amount of that would be due to some of the very initial steps of the implementation of NextGen. I think really it has more to do with, before anybody was ever using the term NextGen, they started, I'm not sure exactly how many years ago, but probably at least 5 years ago, 5 to 10 years ago, started really focusing on national flow control. And I forgot the exact name for, and I know there are a lot of controllers out there listening and FAA people going, you're probably screaming at me right now with the actual name of this component of the National Airspace System. But basically, in the old days, it's like, you know, if you're going to fly a bunch of flights from one place to another and just, okay, go. And then if the weather was bad or whatever, then, you know, deal with it when you get there. And usually that meant, you know, airplanes stacked in holding patterns and having to divert when they run out of their fuel or, you know, necessary fuel or bingo fuel. They get to that and then they go to somewhere else, and then you have all the disruptions of that. And so finally somebody went, what if we tried to meter the flow of traffic a little bit better on a national scale, take a couple steps back, look at this big giant picture, and try to maybe delay somebody's takeoff from an airport, keep them at the gate or perhaps short of the runway for a certain amount of time to facilitate better even flow of traffic, so that when they get to the destination, even if there is weather hampering the operation or the rate of landings and takeoffs, that they will still be able to fit in with a minimum disruption of their flight, and it would essentially eliminate, you know, the need to have all these holding patterns and that kind of thing. And it's worked really, really well. Again, I don't know if you could definitely say that that is next gen. Maybe that would be some kind of a component or pre-next gen or a precursor to next generation operations. But that's been a significant improvement. I mean, it was, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago and more, it was just not unusual that you would, you know, every trip that you'd be on, you'd probably be in a holding pattern for 10 or 15 minutes at least a couple times during your trip during that week. And especially in the summertime, you know, when you have, or spring, summer, early fall, when you have a lot of convective activity. And things have really changed for the better recently in the last several years, where, you know, you have that ground delay program in effect, you have a flow control program, you have ground stops, etc. Basically, those are three things, and it might be worth just talking about it right now. So if whether you're a pilot, and if you're a pilot, you probably already know this, but if you're a frequent flyer, sometimes you'll hear the pilot come on and say, or the gate agent will say, that we are in ground stop, or we are experiencing a ground delay program between Atlanta and New York, or New York has a ground delay program. Or you may hear us say, we're going to pull off to the side here, we're going to be waiting for the next 5 minutes or so for a flow control time. And they all basically have the same net effect, which is to either delay and or stop flying going into or out of a particular airport. The most severe, and when you have the most severe weather situations, are ground stops. Basically, the National Airspace System manager says, you know what, we can't handle any air traffic at all going into this airport. So we are now on a ground stop. And sometimes that ground stop only applies to certain radiuses away from the airport. So there might be, you know, they have these concentric rings, and if a flight is going from, let's say, San Francisco to New York, they may not be affected by the ground stop. Or the ground delay program, where they're delaying flights from taking off at their destination origination airports, so that they're not all there at the same time and all bottled up because of the adverse weather conditions at the destination airport. They would use that ground delay program, and sometimes the ground delay programs only affects aircraft or flights within a certain radius, or like a close proximity to that airport. So it's not unusual, let's say, for a flight from Atlanta to Charlotte to be affected by a ground delay program, but a flight that's coming in from Chicago or Seattle to Charlotte is not. Again, they have various degrees of ground delays. By the way, write this down. I'll put this in the show notes if I remember to do it. There's a great website, and I usually tell my passengers to go there if we have connectivity. It's fly.faa.gov/OIS. Now, if you just go to the fly.faa.gov site, then it gives you a graphic and little, colors from the various airports, but it doesn't give you a lot of detailed information. If you go to the don't put a www in there, just put fly.faa.gov/OIS. And when you go to that page, you'll have a table, basically, that'll show you all the ground stops, ground delay programs for various airports and the reason why. And there are other links in there that you can click on to give you even more detailed information, like who it affects, the radius away from the airport, etc. And there's a lot of technical information in there that you may not understand as well, but at least when you hear your pilot on the PA saying, "Hey, our flight to LaGuardia is in ground delay," or they have a ground delay program at LaGuardia, or a ground stop program, you just pull out your smartphone or your tablet or whatever and just go to fly.faa.gov/OIS, and you'll see whether or not they're making it up or not. And guess what? They're not. So you can see that, oh yeah, look at that. For weather and winds, there's a delay program for operators out of this airspace, going to LaGuardia, and okay, well, I guess we just, have to wait until the conditions improve, etc. So, again, I'll try to remember to put that in the show notes, but it's a great site to point people to, so that they can tell that you're not making stuff up. So getting back to NextGen, and you said, you're not really sure you understand exactly what's going on with that. And honestly, I'm not sure that I have a complete grasp of, the whole thing that they're going to be trying to implement in the future. I know that it's suffered several growing pains and delays in its implementation, and it requires kind of an entirely different way to look at our airspace system, and it requires airlines to spend a lot of money on equipment to install in airliners that may not have that equipment. We are starting to see a lot of, for instance, the RNAV procedures, the area navigation procedures that we have in arrivals and departures out of a lot of airports, where not only do they have plotted tracks for us to fly, but they also have altitude restrictions and airspeed restrictions to kind of help cut down on the radio transmissions, and also to help meter traffic in a more uniform way. And so that's kind of the very first steps in this whole idea of a next-gen airspace system. Next-gen really depends a lot on the use of global positioning satellite systems, GPS systems, for very, very accurate navigational capability. And again, all the modern airplanes have that capability, and some of the older airplanes are being retrofitted with that capability. And so it's slowly being implemented, but it's going to take a little bit longer than everybody had thought. And I still say that, yes, that is going to help improve traffic saturation and that kind of thing. But I think that, for me at least, the bottom line is that the big bottleneck that we have in today's aviation system is concrete. Or what I mean by that is runways, airports that have several runways and have the capability to accept more airplanes, more flights to land and take off simultaneously. And until you improve that capability or capacity. All the things that you're thinking that NextGen is going to do for our system, I don't think are going to. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that, and there's only so much you can do about spacing airplanes close to each other, in trail of each other, especially nowadays with the very tightly confined, very highly accurate paths that we fly in our RNAV arrivals and RNAV departures. We're flying in exactly the same air that the previous airplane flew in, and we're starting to experience a lot more wake turbulence encounters. And they're trying to get the airplanes closer and closer to each other for takeoffs and landings, and they're really kind of getting about as close to the limit as far as safety is concerned, in my opinion. And until they figure out a way to eliminate wake turbulence from the wings, creating lift and causing that wake turbulence, until they come up with some kind of physics-defying method to create lift without creating wake, we're going to be basically limited to a certain distance behind airplanes. And so unless you have more runways, you're not going to be able to operate more flights into and out of various airports. So yeah, that's enough of that, I guess. NextGen. So I think it's got a lot of hope, a lot of promise, but it's just it's getting there slowly. That's what I'll say. And I think that, again, Tyler, the things that you have been experiencing in the last several years have less to do with NextGen implementation and more to do with something that they started doing, before NextGen, which was the monitoring of the flow of traffic on a national scale, and trying to sequence traffic a little bit better as far as takeoffs and landings. Oh, I wish I had a glass of water or something, because my throat is getting a little parched. I guess I could pause, but I don't want to do that yet. Let's see. Ken. We haven't heard from Ken in a while, and he sent some voice feedback, and this one is on the long side, so maybe I'll be able to go and get a glass of water while Ken talks to you. Here we go.
Hello, Captain Jeff. This is Ken, the first officer from Express. I was giving you a lot of feedback last year. I took a break for a while, but anyway, I'm back. I enjoyed the last couple of shows, and I just wanted to give you some feedback from the most recent one I just listened to, 149. You had a listener ask about anti-ice and any performance or advantages, disadvantages. I think it was Sport Pilot Dave who had asked you. And you gave some great feedback. Just wanted to add a couple of things to that. He asked about performance penalties and just wanted to add definite yes. And again, I'm speaking mostly for bleed air systems, which I think is most conventional jets nowadays. Most of them use. I know some of the newer ones, like you mentioned, the 777 has an all-electric system, and there's some other more advanced systems out there. But anyway, on to the one I think the most common is the bleed air systems. And the aircraft I fly, we do pay a performance penalty when we use it, depending on how we use it as well, because we have the option of using it just to warm the engine nacelles, the cowls as we call them, or the leading edges of the wings. And just the cowls, we typically lose maybe 1 to 2% of N1 of our performance off the N1. And for those you non-aviation or general aviation types, or N1, I'm referring to the large fan blade in the front of the engine where most of our thrust comes from. If we have to warm the cowls and the leading edges of the wings, that can be maybe almost probably about a 4, maybe almost up to 5% performance penalty off of our N1 performance. It is a significant performance, and so much so in the fact that there are sometimes a year when we don't have much performance to begin with. We jokingly refer to our anti-ice system as our anti-climb system, because you might not think we use, some folks might not think we use ice too much in the summertime, but up in the flight levels and we get into the clouds, it does require us to turn those systems on. And I know for the aircraft I fly, a lot of times, especially in the summer, with the higher temperatures aloft, and we're already at max weight anyway. We're pretty much given all the climb that we can get out of it a lot of times, and we have to turn on the anti-ice. On top of that, now we're going to lose additional performance off the N1 blades, and if we get that performance drop, a lot of times it means the end of our climb. Sometimes we have to tell ATC we're just going to level off and call it quits at that point, somewhere usually in the mid-20s at that point. But a lot of times it can be the anti-climb system in the summertime if we have to use it for an extended period of time. As far as the performance, I mentioned that Sport Pilot Dave had also asked about detection or automation on anti-ice systems. I know every aircraft's different. For the aircraft I fly, it is completely manual. Again, we can control whether we're going to select to warm the wings and the cowls or both, and the only automation we have per se is our ice detector. We do have an ice detector. It works very well. It works on a principle, I don't have the manual here, look it up, but I do remember basically it works on a principle of vibration. There's two small probes, just maybe about a foot or two behind the pitot tubes that stick out on the side of the aircraft. If I remember correctly, they're set to basically vibrate at a certain frequency. And if they start collecting ice, it'll change, I think, just the set value at which they're set to vibrate or operate. It's not a noticeable vibration. I mean, they just look like two probes sticking out, but if I remember correctly from reading their principle of operation. But once they collect the ice, we'll immediately get a caution light in the cockpit, and at that point, it requires us to turn on our anti-ice systems, and it'll change from a caution to a status message, and it'll remain on until it no longer detects ice. The probes will automatically reset themselves. They work on a cycle. I don't remember what the time cycle is. It might be 30 seconds or 10 seconds or something like that. But they'll warm the probe up and melt the ice off, and then the heater shuts off, and it allows it to remain stagnant again. So it'll start collecting, and if it collects again, it just stays on until it goes through a few cycles with no collection, and then the status message will go away, and we can turn the ice systems back off. Just on the cows and wings, there are different performance criteria when we use both. Anytime we're in visible moisture and it's below 10 degrees Celsius, we're required to turn on the cows. And for those of you out there, we have two types of temperature in the airplane. And when I say below 10, I'm referring to what we call TAT and SAT. Our TAT is a measurement of the aircraft's skin, the actual temperature, and STAT is the actual outside air or static air temperature, and that's the actual temperature. We have both readouts in the cockpit, and anytime we have a TAT, which is the I forget exactly what a total air temperature is what it stands for, but that's the reading of the actual skin. And as you know, flying through the air creates friction, and the friction it creates actually warms up the temperature of the aircraft skin higher than the outside air temperature. So that's the temperature we go by for the anti-ice for activating the system. So anytime we have a aircraft skin temperature that goes below 10 degrees Celsius, we have to turn the cows on. And for the wings, it's below 5 degrees. Now, some of you might be asking, why is there a difference between the 5 and the 10 between the engine cowlings and the wings? And it's a good question. I wondered that too when I first learned the system, and the reason being is called for venturi effect, just like on venturi carburetors. As you know, anytime we have evaporation, you have a greater temperature drop. And the reason being is they put the criteria at 10 for the engines because they are a huge vacuum, as you know, and as they suck in all the air, they figure any moisture also going in would cause a higher evaporation rate, which would cause a greater temperature drop, and they're more so susceptible to icing at a higher temperature than the wings. Now the wings, as I mentioned, anytime same thing, we go in visible moisture and the skin temperature goes below 5 degrees Celsius, then we have to have both wings and cows on. And there are some speeds related to this too, besides temperatures as well. Anytime we're in visible moisture and we go below 230 knots or below 230 knots, below 10 degrees C, then we have to have both wings and cows, regardless if the detector is on or not. we have to have both wings and cowls on. And again, I think it deals with the friction thing, because if we go above 230 knots and the ice detector is not on, then we can turn off the wings and just leave the cowls on. And we can leave it that way, which is then we're only losing a couple of % performance for the cowls, which is good. And as long as we keep it above 230 knots, which usually below 10, we typically, that's a performance consideration. As soon as you get out in these small airports, we want to quickly get out of that Class D or E Echo airspace so we can accelerate the 250 right away, so we can get the wings secured or get the wings off, so we can get as much performance back as we'd like. And let's see, temperature. And the one more temperature I'll throw out there is the -40 SAT, which is outside air, the total air. The static air. Up in the flight levels, if the temperature reads -40 Celsius or below or colder, then we can turn off all the icing, believe it or not. And I guess the thing is here that the ice particles are, I guess, so hard at this point that they don't stick to the aircraft. So that doesn't happen very often, but this time of year you do see it when you get up into the mid to low 30s in the flight levels. You might occasionally see a static air temperature outside that goes below -40, and then we can turn everything off at that point. Of course, unless we get the detector comes on. Anytime that detector comes on, everything has to go on, regardless. Let's see, I'll finish up with the detector. The other detector, I'll call it the Mark 1 eyeball. Anytime the detector goes off or we go in, as soon as we enter the clouds in icing conditions, one of the first things I notice I do in most of the pilots, we always look at the windshield wiper arms. There's a little knuckle on the arm there with a cotter pin, and anytime you collect ice or the detector goes off, we're always looking at that. You can almost always see the ice. That's one of the first places it starts. You can see it instantly start to collect if you are in icing conditions and gathering ice, and it's easier for us to. We have a good view of it from where our seats are. Speaking of which, collected a pretty good amount of ice coming into Detroit. I think it was about 3 weeks ago. They leveled us off right at the tops of the clouds on an extended downwind, and we picked up quite a bit and I took some snaps of it as we got to the gate. Some of it had fallen off quite before I even got the pictures, but I'll share those pictures with you, Captain Jeff. You're welcome to share those if you'd like. But it shows where I'm talking about. There's a nice little mustache of ice all the way across the wiper arms. And even the winglets that I fly on the aircraft that I have collected quite a bit as well. The aircraft, I got to give Bombardier credit though, because I've actually seen worse. And the aircraft that I currently fly has excellent de-icing systems. I have a lot of confidence in it. Anytime we're in icing, that it's as long as we don't have any system discrepancies, that it works very well. So the only place it collects typically is the winglets and like the wiper arms. You'll see it build up sometimes. Let's see, aside from that, I guess that's about, the last thing I wanted to mention was the cloud tops. I remember this was a standard FAA question on the written exams. I forget which one, but it never really, I never gave it much thought until I started working in this business in the airline industry. And sure enough, that question holds a lot of truth, believe it or not. And the question was, where is ice most likely to occur or happen? And the answer was at the very tops of the clouds. And being in the airline industry, of course, we're always going through multiple layers. And almost, I would say, probably about 90% of the time, when we get the ice detector, we get the ding, it comes on. Within 60 seconds or a minute or less, we're coming through the top of a cloud layer. We break out on top, and sure enough, we had accumulated that ice right as we went through the top. Same thing on a descent, and I'm sure Captain Jeff, you would agree, or I'm sure you've noticed that as well. You can be in the clear, and as soon as you enter the clouds, I don't know if you have a detector or not on the aircraft you fly, but on ours, the detector goes off almost immediately as soon as we enter the clouds, especially this time of year. And those pictures I'm going to share with you, that's exactly what happened. Coming to Detroit, it was a clear, beautiful day, except for there was a low overcast, right? I think it was right around 4,000, and they leveled us off there for an extended downwind, and that's where we picked up all that ice in those pictures I didn't babble on too long, so just wanted to add a little bit about the icing stuff for Sport Pilot Dave, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks, Captain Jeff. Have a good one. Bye.
Well, thanks, Ken, and welcome back to the Airline Pilot Guide community. I know you've been there the whole time. You just haven't been sending me audio feedback. And man, you really saved it all up, didn't you? In fact, he sent me 2 other pieces of feedback, which we haven't heard yet. That was the longest one, though. Don't want to scare anybody. So thank you for explaining the performance penalties of the anti-icing systems on airplanes. On the jet that I fly, it's a separate engine anti-ice system and a separate wing or airfoil anti-ice system. Yeah, if you have all that on, it really significantly impacts the performance of the jet. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And at least on the airplane that I fly, the McDonnell Douglas 80 and 90 series, the flight management computer does not know when you have the engine anti-icing and airfoil anti-icing systems on. It does not take that into account when it calculates your optimum altitude. So you may actually be operating at a higher altitude than you should be due to the fact that you're operating the pneumatic engine and airfoil icing system. So that's something you have to keep in mind or bear in mind. And one of the clues that you might have as you level off and you get to you get to cruise altitude and you get to cruise power settings to keep you at the cruise speed, if you notice that the margin between where the power is set, either N1 settings or EPR settings, as in my case, and the maximum marking for the power at that altitude, and if you notice it's like very, very close together, that's a bad sign. That should be a red flag that you are operating in at an altitude that is not giving you a very large safety margin. So that should cause you to think, maybe we should look at our operational data manual or whatever the manual is that you use at your airline to see the exact performance and optimum altitudes and that kind of thing. Go in there and with your actual conditions and realize, we are probably about 4,000 feet higher than we should be with all this stuff on. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And ice detectors. The airplane that I fly, Ken, does not have an ice detector. Our ice detectors are what'd you call it? The Mark V eyeball. To notice when we're collecting ice. Anytime we're in visible moisture or any clouds, and we notice that the temperature is below plus 10 TAT or RAT, we turn on our engine anti-icing systems because of the reason that you mentioned about the fact that it's a vacuum and Bernoulli's principle and whatever the laws are, that when you when the air is being sucked into the engine, even at higher than freezing temperatures, the effect of the vacuum sucking it into the engine does cause the water, the precipitation, or the moisture in the air to freeze, and that could affect your engines. So anytime that we see 10 degrees plus 10 or below, and we, most of the airplanes that I've flown before the airplane I'm on now, we had kind of a lower limit, like as you, I think, mentioned, minus 40 degrees Celsius, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore after that. Not true with the airplane that I fly now. They don't state a low end, so anytime the temperature is below plus 10 degrees Celsius and there is visible moisture, we have to have the engine anti-icing on. And then we also look at our wiper blade. There's a nut on the wiper blade that we look at with a cotter pin, as you mentioned. And if you start seeing some ice crystals building up on that, or you start seeing it maybe in a corner of your forward windscreen, that's the clue that it's time now to turn on the airfoil anti-icing system, which is what it's called on the airplane that I fly, wing anti-ice. So, what else did you say? Oh yeah, in the summertime, a lot of people are are kind of amazed when they find that we use engine anti-icing and sometimes even airfoil anti-icing year-round, whether it's 90 to 100 degrees on the ground. If you're up high, the temperatures really drop pretty rapidly, and if you're in visible moisture, you could actually find yourself in icing conditions even in the summertime, even in the south. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then your pictures that you sent, I'll put them, hopefully I'll remember to put these in the show notes, of the, quote, mustache. Did it remind you of me when you saw that mustache on the leading edges and other surfaces of your airplane? It's kind of a white mustache. Kind of does look like my stash. Okay, so thanks for that first piece of feedback, Ken. Let's hear what you have to say on feedback 2.
Hello, Captain Jeff. This is Ken, the first officer from Express. Just wanted to add one more quick feedback. I'll try to keep this one a little bit shorter. On the same show, APG 149, you had a listener ask about a stuck throttle, if there was a procedure or checklist for it. I know every company's different. And I just wanted to add at the where I work, we actually had such an event occur not long after I started working there many years back. And they subsequently updated the company checklist, and we now have a checklist procedure for a stuck throttle event in our cockpit now. I don't remember exactly how it goes. I've never had it happen to me, but I also have to give credit to our training department. They do a pretty good job of incorporating line events into our annual training, and the stuck throttle was actually incorporated into one of a half dozen events that random events that they could throw at us in our when we go in for our annual sim training or line checks in the sim. And I never got this particular scenario in the sim, but I talked to other crews that did get it. And when these things happen as part of our training, for the line event trainings, the instructors actually, and I assume it's probably the same at your work, the instructor at those points is just an observer. They can't do any feedback at all. You're strictly a crew handling a situation, and they're just there to observe to see how every crew does it. And from what I heard is for the throttle event, different crews did different things. Most crews, though, the consensus came out of it was if you have a good engine, you leave it running as long as you can, and that's what most of the crews ended up doing in most of the training events. One of my buddies actually had it on part of his training event that year, and he was telling me, I thought his was pretty, he handled it pretty well, I thought, when he told me about how they dealt with this situation. He said that they decided to leave the engine running up till they got to 10,000 before they went below 10, and to even take it a step further, they ran through the entire engine shutdown checklist procedure for the stuck throttle all the way to the last couple of steps to actually securing the engine. They only had like a couple items. That way, when they went below 10, they didn't have to break the checklist. They already knew there was only 2 or 3 more items that they had to do to shut the engine down, and it was pretty much a non-event at that point. So it wasn't that big a deal. But yeah, a stuck throttle event, I guess it does happen. It can happen, or it does happen. It can happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen very often. But there is, at my work, we have a procedure and a checklist for it, and we've actually used it as one of our training scenarios in our annual line events. All right, Captain Jeff, that's all I got for this one. We'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Ken, for illuminating us with the stuck throttle procedure at your airline, and do appreciate your feedback on that. And then finally, let's hear from you one more time, Ken.
Hey, Captain Jeff, this is Ken. Just wanted to share one more quick story about icing. This has never happened to me, knock on wood, but I did actually talk to a coworker that this is a severe icing event, and that happened to him over the summer. And I talked to another guy, I remember in the past, that a similar event happened to him as well, and he described his story. The outcome is very similar as well. But anyway, for the severe icing, I've never had it happen, but the 2 stories that I heard, they said when it happened to them, the ice actually started collecting on the N1 blades of the engine, and the vibration indicator, which normally doesn't display in the cockpit, will suddenly appear on the engine status page. And it said not only does it appear, but the two stories that I heard, they said it doesn't. It's not long before it actually it pegs the needle out, it buries it in the red, it goes off the chart basically. And the reason why I said I'm glad they said this never happened is both stories they told me, they said that it feels like the engine's going to fall off the airplane. It's just it's really, the whole plane is shaking. They said it's not a comfortable experience. You think you're gonna the engine's going to come apart or something. I guess that's as it starts slinging the ice. There is a checklist procedure. It's actually not under ice. It's actually under the N1 vibration checklist. But it does mention in there that's most likely the cause of what's happening. And surprisingly, it tells you to, of course, you turn on the continuous ignition switches to help prevent any possible flame out that might, that you could incur. That's always a precaution switch that we throw on in almost any situation anyway. But the other thing it says too is you push the throttles up. You got to leave those. They said do not pull the throttles back. You want to keep those engines spinning as much as you can. I guess one, to help sling the ice off, and two, if those engines are, if there's resistance again, you want to try to fight any resistance of those blades that are going against those blades. So you want to keep as much energy in the engine as possible. But and both outcomes, the stories I heard, they said they followed the procedure, and eventually the ice slung free the engine and it landed. I remember the one guy I talked to over the summer. He said when they landed, they actually did a bore scope down into the engine. Maintenance came out, and I got to give credit to Pratt & Whitney. No, I think it's GE that makes our engines. I forget. I have to look that up. But anyway, but he said the inspection was fine. The engine handled it. The plane I fly is the CRJ 200, which has the same engines, by the way, as the A10 Thunderbolt, and then also that was used on the S3 Vikings. I think the model number is a different variation, but basically the same. But they're built to withstand it, I guess. So it handled it, and he said maintenance signed it off and put the plane back on the line. But he said when it happened, though, he said it wasn't the most pleasant thing. It felt like the engines were going to come apart. But I've never had that happen. Hopefully it never will. And anyway, just wanted to share that last story with you on Icing, Captain Jeff. We'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.
Ooh, I hope it never happens to me. Thank you, Ken, for sharing that with us as well. Okay, well, now, yesterday I was recording the first part of this episode, and if you're listening to the audio or watching the video on YouTube, you probably don't know that it is now a day later, the magic of podcasting, and it is now Thursday morning, and yesterday afternoon, evening, I started doing a little bit more research and found or stumbled upon the, we were talking about that incident of a couple of flights on, I believe it was Saturday, about 5 days ago, where there was somebody tweeting on Twitter that there was a bomb. There were bomb threats made against Delta Flight 1156 and Southwest Airlines 2492. I think those are the right numbers. And they ended up, according to the story, NORAD scrambled some fighters from McEntire Air Reserve Unit in South Carolina, I believe, to join up with these airplanes. And so I found the live ATC audio that somebody had compiled. And we'll listen to the very first part of it. But what I find interesting is it sounds to me like, at least with the Delta flight and possibly with the Southwest flight as well, that the flight crews had no idea that anything was going on. So I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, but just let's take a listen to a little bit of this, and maybe you'll see what I mean.
And Tower Delta 1156, sorry, just inside Java. Delta 1156, no problem, sir. Runway 28, wind 260 at 10. Clear the land, plan on exiting at Sierra Golf 4 for me, second high speed to the right. Okay, we're cleared to land. We'll plan on getting off the second high speed for 1156.
Delta 1156, taxi via right on Sierra Golf.
Right turn, Sierra Golf, 1156.
Delta 1156, hold your position there, sir. We're working on a gate for you.
Okay, 1156, we'll hold right here.
Hey, ground over the tower, Delta 1156.
Delta 1156, ground.
Can you give us a heads up of what's going on?
Yes, sir. They're looking for a gate for you right now, sir.
We had a gate. Do you know what the problem is?
Negative. Stand by one second. Let me ask my supervisor.
Okay, so they land. They tell them, and this is not something that is very common for us to get instructed to use a certain, well, you know, I guess it's not really completely uncommon, but normally they let us use whatever high-speed taxiway exiting the runway that we want. So the first clue that something was a little bit different, again, it's not completely uncommon, but it's not common for them to say, plan on using, you know, the second high-speed exit. And then, you know, they tell them to go off and then basically hold their position, and then the other voice comes on, which I'm assuming is the captain. Yeah, what's going on? Can you tell us what's going on here? Because, and then the guy lies and said, well, I don't, you know, your company says you don't have a gate. And then the captain says, well, no, we do have a gate. What's going on here? So something is just not right. And let's continue a little bit more. That's what I mean by, had they known that they had this bomb threat via an alert to their ACAR system, or had they looked out their window and saw an F-16 fighter accompanying them on their flight, they may have thought, something is going on. But apparently they had no idea that there was a bomb threat made against that flight, number one. Number two, obviously they didn't know that any F-16 was, you know, on their wing or following them. And I'm not even sure if there actually was, because that seems to me something that we would notice, unless they were just traveling, you know, right behind us where we couldn't see them, because we don't have rear view mirrors. Anyway, let's listen to a little bit more.
Delta 1156.
Go ahead, 1156.
Yeah, Delta 1156, I'm not able to get enough information. If you want to, just contact your company. They should be able to help you out. And let me know when you're back on frequency, or if you can simultaneously monitor this frequency and I can contact your company, that'd be good too.
Yeah, I'm on with you now. He's talking to him on the other right now. So, yeah, I'm here with you right now.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Tower Delta 1156.
Delta 1156, Tower.
Yeah, I just talked to the company. They told us what the problem was, and they weren't sure what you guys were planning on doing with us, either parking us remotely out here or finding us a remote gate somewhere else out by the terminal there. So we're just waiting to hear from either you or the company first, I guess.
Delta 1156, roger, sir. We're going to hold you right there for a second, and we're working on that. We'll be right back with you, and we'll keep you in the loop as much as possible.
Okay, so you see what I mean? Now all of a sudden the captain comes back on and says, okay, now I talked to the company, we know what's going on, and, you know, are we going to park in a remote area or what, you know? So that's why I'm thinking they had no idea that there was a threat made against the flight. Let me continue here.
We appreciate that.
No problem. As much as we can, you know.
I understand.
Tower, Southwest 2492 is with you at Jabba.
That's the next
Southwest 2492 at Atlanta Tower, runway 28, wind 280 at 16, clear to land number 1.
Clear to land runway 28, Southwest 2492.
Attention all aircraft, fly away to Sector Departure Quebec, wind 280 at 16, Atlanta, altimeter 2988. Southwest 2492, plan on exiting at the end of the runway to the right, sir. Roll out to the end.
Roll out to the end, Southwest 2492.
That's not common.
Southwest 2492, continue down to the end of the runway and turn right on Sierra Golf.
Right on Sierra Golf, Southwest 2492.
That's the parallel
Southwest
taxiway.
2492, hold your position there, sir. I've been advised they're working on a gate for you.
Hold our position, 2492.
This is Tower Delta 1156.
Delta 1156, sir.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had any updates or anything that we can pass on to our dispatcher.
Delta 1156, stand by. And Delta 1156, still working on some coordination for you, sir.
Okay, copy, thanks.
Southwest 2492. Southwest 2492, Atlanta Tower.
Yes, sir. Someone we can discuss a plan with. I understand it's not in CSA's hands, it's a local patrolling issue.
I'm sorry, say again your last name?
Yeah, we've been determined that it's a non-specific threat. Our company requested that we taxi to the gate to deal with the problem there. And we're wondering if we can get a clearance to do so.
Southwest 2492, I have your request. Stand by 1 second.
Okay, this goes on for another, about 25 minutes. I'll put a link to it in the show notes if you want to listen to the whole thing. I actually didn't listen to the entire back and forth, but it goes on, and they end up having to wait for quite some time for Department of Defense personnel to show up, and that was the FBI. Well, the FBI actually gets involved, and they start talking with them, and they end up getting buses and deplaning the passengers and taking them to the terminal to do a full check of the airplane, etc. And I'm not quite as sure with the Southwest flight as I am with the Delta flight that the crews didn't have any idea that something like this was going on. So, and then so now you're thinking, or I'm thinking, okay, what if I'm in this situation? We're parked. We just landed. We pulled off the runway. We're on a parallel taxiway. We're stopped, and so all the passengers are going, "What's going on? Why are we not moving?" You know, you have to. First of all, you have to ascertain what the situation is as the flight crew. Then you have to start coordinating with your company, and then you have to start coordinating with the cabin crew to let them know what's happening. And then at some point, you're going to have to say, somehow, that there has been a threat made, a bomb threat made on our flight. And now, you know, you got to be careful because you're going to freak everybody out, possibly. So I'm not sure exactly, you know, how this was all handled on the airplane. Maybe there's some cell phone video out there somewhere where somebody uploaded it to YouTube, and you can perhaps hear some of the announcements made. I haven't actually looked for that. Maybe I should look for that, and it'd be interesting to hear. Anyway, turns out that, of course, these were not valid threats. And also, last night, when I was doing a little bit more research on this, different news outlets were saying that in the last 5 days, there have been anywhere from 16 to 20 or more of these threats made upon individual flights. I mean, every day, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I'm not sure about Tuesday and Wednesday, but I don't know, these are copycat, you know, tweets or Twitter users, you know, trying to have some fun with this whole thing or what. But you'll remember last year, I think that there was a tweet made against an American Airlines flight, and they actually tracked this young lady down. I think it was somewhere in the UK, and they actually arrested her, I think. So I'm sure that the FBI and other agencies are looking into tracking down the whereabouts of these people causing this disruption. But in every case, in the last 5 days or so, these threats made using social media were not valid threats. But you got to be careful. You know, there may be an actual real threat made using social media, so you have to do all kinds of things to vet these threats. So anyway, I just thought it was worth mentioning that there was kind of an update to that. Again, I'll have the link to that live ATC audio in the show notes. Okay, moving on. This is from Josh in Nashville. He says, I've been reading about this gentleman, Bill Harrelson, who just completed a polar circumnavigation of the globe in a single-engine piston Lancer 4. Lots of interesting info on his Facebook page, ZQ Pilot. After being turned back by weather during his first attempt in 2013, he completed the trek on his second attempt, departing Kinston, North Carolina, not Kingston, Kinston, December 28th, 2014, and returning yesterday, January 21st. Of course, that was about a week ago. It's now the 29th. I know I get excited and inspired by endeavors such as this. I thought that some of my fellow APG community members might as well. I've attached the FlightAware track for his final leg. Looks like he flew until he ran out of north. From what I'm reading, that was 4,800 nautical miles and close to 26 straight hours of solo flight. Congrats to Mr. Harrelson. And you can, I'll put this link in the show notes, and the FlightAware graphic here basically shows him leaving North Carolina and just almost heading straight due north over the Canadian northern provinces, the Hudson Bay, the east side of it, heading up into the Arctic, and then back down over Alaska. Interesting. Okay, so I looked up the website and Facebook page and found out a little bit more information about Mr. Bill Harrelson, who is a retired airline pilot. Maybe that's what I'll do when I retire. No, I doubt it. Anyway, again, flying a modified Lancer 4 single-engine airplane, piston-powered, by a Barrett IO 550 engine. The airplane was modified to carry a long-range fuel load of 361 gallons. And there's also some information about a real-time tracking site called Spider Tracks that you can kind of follow his journey. Again, he departed Kinston, North Carolina, to December 28th, and that, yeah, several of these legs of this journey were extremely long, 26 hours, 29 hours, and he's by himself, and I don't know if this has I hope this has some sort of a autopilot system. I bet it does. Harrelson is having another go at the record-setting flight after being turned away in March 2013 by adverse weather around the South Pole. Bill Harrelson, who watches South Pole weather the way most people check the forecasts for their hometowns, used to think that March was the ideal time for the trip. After the setback in 2013, and with the weather window closing by April on an unusually unfavorable season, he decided that late December might prove a better chance to avoid the potential threats of icing and unfavorable winds. Let's see, the reversal in 2013 wasn't the end of long-distance flying for Harrelson on that effort. His stateside return was accomplished with a 27-hour nonstop flight from the southern tip of South America to a landing in Key West, Florida. Harrelson was already the record holder of distance flown in the aircraft, having made a flight in February 2013 from Guam to Jacksonville, Florida. Wow, a distance of 7,051 nautical miles. And it only took 38 hours and 29 minutes. Holy cow. That is determination, my friends. Thanks, Josh, for letting us know about that. Let's see, more audio feedback, this time from Vernon, former air traffic controller and retired certified flight instructor.
Good afternoon, Captain Jeff. This is Vernon from Fort Morgan, Colorado. Haven't called in for a long time, but I couldn't resist on a couple things. I am cruising along at about 5,000 feet MSL. Regrettably, on the plains of northeastern Colorado, that means I'm on the interstate in a vehicle and not in an airplane. Long time ago, you had some interesting comments on call signs, and there were a couple that came to mind I've been meaning to call you about. I was an air traffic controller in the mid-70s at Brackett Airport in Southern California, some of your old stomping grounds. And I remember a little Cessna would come through patrolling the power lines and telephone lines, and he used the call sign Telephone Patrol 83 Alpha. But I worked with another controller named Gary Heiner who had a sense of humor, and he never called the plane Telephone Patrol 83 Alpha. He just always called it Telephone Pole 83 Alpha. From Brackett Airport, I moved to Burbank, where Disney Studios had a Gulfstream 159, and its number was 234 Mike Mike. But as you can probably guess, they used the call sign 234 Mickey Mouse. So that's another one I would never forget. I would really love to be able to have that ringtone. One of the other listeners, particularly the attendant call ringtone, but I'm lacking in my technology expertise to get it. I was able to email it from my computer to the phone, hear it on the phone, but to make it with my app on my Samsung phone, to get the app to play it when the phone rings, I just wasn't able to do that. So if anybody has some short advice of that missing link, so when I get a phone call, it would ring the flight attendant call, that would be a lot of fun to have. I'm enjoying episode 150. We'll now go back to driving across the plains and listening to that. Thanks, as always, Captain Jeff, for your good and dedicated weekly shows and wins as appropriate. God bless. This is Vernon, retired CFI and former air traffic controller from Fort Morgan, Colorado.
Watch out! Watch out for that bison on the road there. He's trying to drive and record and being distracted by his Samsung phone. Hey, Vernon, thanks for your feedback. Always appreciate it. Kind of missed that classical music in the background. But regarding the ringtone, thank you for sharing those stories about call signs. The ringtone, I can tell you what to do or how to do it with with an iOS device, but I can't with your Samsung, which I'm assuming is most likely an Android operating system. I know that on iTunes and iOS devices, you change the file type to M4A, I believe is the file designation. But you could probably Google that and find out how to do it with an Android phone. I don't think it's that difficult, but you have to do some manipulation with the file suffix, or is that what you call that? The file type, and then the phone will go, oh, that's a ringtone. Okay, so maybe somebody out there listening can send a link to me, and then I can forward it to Vernon in Fort Morgan, Colorado. Thank you, Vernon, for that. And Pilot Pip sent me some feedback. So let's see here. Let's see what he has to say.
Hi there, Captain Jeff. It's Pilot Pop here. I'm Pilot Pip's evil twin brother. I know Pip only ever sends you feedback when he wants to shamelessly self-plug his own show, but I'm not doing that today. Actually, I wanted to give you some feedback on a story that you and Steph talked about on the last episode, and it was the story of the BA pilot in Dublin who apparently refused to vacate the runway because he wasn't ready for departure. And it caused quite a stir. I saw this clip on YouTube and I read about it on various pilot forums, and I don't think it was really fair, some of the criticism and flack he received. He was called arrogant, and people accused him of not caring what was going on around him, and I don't think that's the case, and I don't think it was fair criticism at all. Now, I don't think really that either one of them, the controller or the pilot here, covered themselves in glory with this little incident. But I do think there was more to the story than perhaps we were led to believe. Now, we didn't hear the full audio clip. There was obviously something else had happened before he was at the holding point. But you and I know that when you reach the holding point and you say you're ready for departure, that's not the end of the story. Once you're cleared to line up, then there's another checklist that you have to follow. At least at my airline and every other airline that I have knowledge of, you then have a lineup checklist, which typically consists of perhaps 6 or 8 challenge and response items, things like turning on the TCAS, making sure that you have your airframe and engine anti-ice set to the appropriate modes. Perhaps your air conditioning packs need to be set in the correct configuration. External lighting, this kind of thing. And it's a challenge and response, and it takes not very long, but it might take 20 seconds to complete. And it is, crucially, a safety critical item that needs to be completed and needs to be completed correctly. So I think the case here in Dublin, he'd reported ready, and as he was lining up, they were trying to complete the lineup checklist, but unfortunately they were prevented from doing so because this controller kept interrupting to give them a bit of a bashing, to give them a hard time. So I think he was well within his rights to say to her, as he did, stand by, and he said stand by 3 times, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. If I've got a safety critical item, then I need to make sure it's being completed correctly for the sake of my passengers. So if ATC are trying to tell me something which is not safety critical, then fine, tell them to stand by. Maybe there was an element of him trying to string it out a bit, but I'm a little disappointed that an air traffic controller wasn't aware that these things are going on in the cockpit as you line up. So saying you're ready at the holding point is not the end of the story. There's still things we have to do. So to say he was arrogant and caused 2 aircraft to go around, that's a little unfair. I think the controller can take some of the blame, because if she just stopped yabbering at him and let him get on with it, he would have departed and those aircraft wouldn't have had to go around. Possibly. It's just another take on this little story. So I didn't want people to think that this sort of thing was going on, because it's not fair criticism at all. Anyhow, that's it from me. Love the show as always. Keep it coming, and talk again soon. Cheers.
Well, thank you, Pilot Pop. You're Pilot Pip's evil twin. So I thought, maybe let me listen to this again with a different perspective.
845, there's traffic behind you waiting to depart. If you're not ready, I'm going to bring you onto the runway to vacate up 34.
Okay, just a point of order, we'll just wait for the cabin to be ready. It takes about 2 minutes from the time that it's all gentlemen before.
Okay, you need to enter runway 28, please. Turn right onto runway 34 to vacate.
Okay, right there, we don't know, as you said. We didn't hear anything prior to this point, so I don't know if it was conveyed to the air traffic control ground controller or tower controller that they would be ready in a certain amount of time, or if they gave the impression that they would be ready, and then it turns out that the cabin crew hadn't finished their safety briefing, etc. I'm not sure what happened there, but let's continue.
Stand by, it's Spirit 845.
Spirit 845, proceed onto runway 28 now and vacate right onto runway 34. There is traffic behind you waiting to depart.
Yeah, I've just got a phone call, someone. That's Spirit 845, we are actually fully ready.
Seabird 845, line up runway 28 and wait.
Line up runway 28, Spirit 845.
Now, if it had stopped at that point, and they went to line up and wait, and then they could have completed their final items of their checklist, as you mentioned, Pilot Pop, then I think everything would have worked out. There wouldn't have been a disruption of the flow of landings and takeoffs. However, I kind of agree with you. This was not necessary right here.
For future reference, Seabird 845, I suggest you advise the ground controller that you're unable to take departure yet, and you should really be testing out to Echo 1 when you're not ready for departure, because there is traffic behind waiting that is ready.
Okay, and then that goes on, that exchange back and forth, back and forth. Okay, well, we are ready, but we need to complete our checklist items. So the point is well taken, Pilot Pip. So thank you for your perspective on that, and maybe there wasn't any arrogance there. Maybe it was just, I think that it started off, well, I'm not going to go anymore. So who knows? We weren't in the cockpit or the tower cab, but everything, I think a little bit of blame can be placed in both places. You're right. So I was going through some stuff, and I came upon a little clip, and I meant to play this a long time ago, but but I forgot. It got lost in the shuffle of things. So speaking of Pilot Pip and the Plane Safety Podcast, another plug, let's listen to this. Let's listen to this. Why is it not playing? Oh, dear. Okay, hang on. Something is stuck in my audio player. Huh. Why is it doing that? Well, that's not good. Here, let me see if I can bring it over here. Stand by. Technical difficulties. My sound system doesn't seem to be cooperating. Okay, I'm going to do this. Nope. No sound there. No sound there. Okay. Well, I will probably edit this out in the audio and video, but you watching at home, kids, watching the live recording. By the way, I need to remember where this is. About 45 minutes in. Okay. I need to quit my soundboard and restart my soundboard. And there we go. Now it seems to be working. Interesting. Okay. As I said, I meant to play this some time ago, and I completely forgot, so let's listen in.
Now, those of you who listen to Captain Jeff APG will have heard a few episodes ago that he used a little snippet of one of my previous shows, one of my musical introductions.
I did.
And he commented on my fabulous musical ability.
I did.
Now, unfortunately for Captain Jeff, he didn't have permission to use that little snippet. So, as we speak, a team of highly paid plane safety podcast lawyers are putting a case together, and we're going to take him for everything he's got. All those millions of dollars he has stashed away in his coffee fund. No, only kidding, of course. If you're listening, Captain Jeff, you're very welcome, and I'm pleased my lack of musical talent amused you in some small way. But, with Captain Jeff in mind, in honour of Captain Jeff, in fact, this week we have a very special musical introduction to Topic of the Week. This is a little ditty called The Podcast Prance, recorded in 2014 by the Oink Spits. Take it away, fellas. I like podcasts, I like APG, I like Carlos and Simon and UKPT. There are many others like the Airplane Geeks, but only Plane Safety has Topic of the Week.
Wow, that's good. Thank you so much, Pilot Pip, for that. Maybe I need to replace my Java Jive with that instead. No, I don't think so. So anyway, Pilot Pip, the host of the wildly popular Plane Safety Podcast, and you can find it over at planesafetypodcast.com, I think. And by the way, and that was like on episode number 7, I think, 6 or 7, October of last year. And I just was listening to the recent episode where he had an interview, a Skype interview with Carlos, who used to send in audio feedback on a regular basis to this show, but now he has his own show. He and Simon do the Plane Talking podcast, Plane Talking UK podcast, something like that. I'll have the link in the show notes. And it's a fabulous podcast talking about aviation from mostly a passenger point of view. Simon does some great talk about military aviation, and they they talk about year round, but especially coming up very soon, the air show season over in the UK. And they attend a lot of air shows and talk about all the things that they've seen, etc. But something that, and I hadn't been keeping up on a regular basis with their podcast, but I learned that Carlos is actually taking private pilot lessons. So he was talking a little bit about his experience with working on his private pilot license. And I think at the point that they did the interview was he had about 16 hours of flying time. So it's very interesting. So check out the latest episode of the Plane Safety Podcast and also Plane Talking UK podcast. Hope I got all those right. So check out those guys. You know what? It'd be fun to do, guys. Simon, Carlos, and Pip. We should do a Google Hangout together and record that. That'd be a lot of fun. Not sure what we'd call that, but it would be fun nonetheless. Okay, so moving on with Mark. And actually somebody just today, I think, or yesterday, today, actually. Let's see, who was this? Thomas. Where are you, Thomas? Does it say? Thomas Richter also sent me a heads up about this, but Mark did this about 5 days ago. And he says, really? And so he has a link to an app that calculates your flight's chances of crashing. And the name of the app? Am I Going Down? Wow. Okay. So I checked it out, and I think it's like 99 cents on iOS. A new app called Am I Going Down? ? Calculates a plane's chances of crashing in an effort to put apprehensive passengers at ease. Now, I'm not really sure that this is the app to do that, actually, but maybe this will help. I don't know. But I find that a lot of people that have anxiety about flying aren't really that impressed with statistics. You know, the old thing, well, you know, it's a lot more dangerous to drive in a car to the airport than it is to fly on the airplane that you're flying to go wherever you're going. Well, that is true. But for those of you out there who suffer flying anxiety, does that really help at all? Probably not, because this fear that you have or anxiety you have about flying is not necessarily a rational fear. I mean, stats kind of appeal to our rational thinking, but this fear or anxiety that we have is not always, you know, the part of our brain that is rational. But anyway, if you think this might help, you might want to check it out. Again, it's Am I Going Down? Am I Going Down? It's on the App Store, and as I said, I think it's like 99 cents. And so you can go through and you can put in your route and your airplane and the airline, and then it will give you the astronomically tiny chance that you could possibly be involved in an accident based on statistics and history. What was I going to say? Something tickled my brain when I was talking about, driving to the airport. Again, and you've heard me mention this many times before, I continue to see, and I don't really say anything about it because I don't want to be, you know, that guy, but I look around in the transportation vans that we use, either the hotel's van or transportation that we've contracted with, or airline has contracted with to take us from the airport to the hotel and back. And I look around, and most of these vehicles, I'd say 99% of the time, have seat belts installed. They don't always work, but they do have them. And I look around again and do a little bit of a survey silently and see how many are wearing their seat belts. I'd say probably 90% of the time the driver is, which is good. I expect that. And then probably 50% of the time my fellow pilot riding with me is wearing his or her seatbelt. And then about 10% of the time, I'd say, flight attendants, the cabin crew, are wearing seatbelts. Maybe one of them, 1 out of 3 or 4. And but more often than not, it's usually just the driver and me wearing a seatbelt. And I'm thinking, Why? Why is it that people think that there is no danger, that we're somehow protected by this bubble of safety in a van? And every time I ask them, I said, well, when you get in your own car, do you wear your seatbelt? Oh, yeah. I never go anywhere without putting my seatbelt on in my car. Then why aren't you wearing it now? Aren't you the same person that goes around and like bitches at people if they're sitting in their, excuse me for that word, complains to people that they're sitting in their airline seat and they don't have their seatbelt on when the seatbelt light is on? Maybe that's what we need. We need in these vans to have a light in the overhead panel saying seatbelt on or whatever. Okay, enough ranting. I'll step down from my soapbox. Thank you, Mark, and I've already forgotten Thomas for making me aware of that app. Jack writes, after having listened to episode 151, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself after listening to the feedback regarding the United 747 at San Francisco bound for Hong Kong. I personally think that it is quite funny that a flight crew that is so senior, I think he's talking about a cabin crew, that is so senior and has probably been exposed to many pranks along their career, raised such a stink about some writing in the dirt on the back of the aircraft. While I understand that practical jokes hinting towards terrorism or accident should not be taken lightly, I do not think that the writing could have been a threat to the security of the flight. One idea I thought of after some time considering the event was that maybe a line mechanic or someone was writing the words, since that particular type of aircraft is starting to be retired from the main airlines in America that use that aircraft. I do think, however, that nothing can be taken too seriously in this field of public air travel, or just aviation in general, since there is so much to lose. This got me thinking about the bomb threat in Atlanta yesterday, January 24th, about 30 miles from where I live. The airlines received tweets saying that there were bombs on the planes and that they acted on those tweets. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have, but nothing can be taken too seriously in the aviation field. Sorry for repeating myself. Well, sometimes you have to repeat yourself, Jack. Sorry for the long feedback. Wish you clear skies, tailwinds, and the right phases of flight and no delays. Thanks for all the time you put into the show, and I speak on behalf of all the APG listeners. It is greatly appreciated, Jack. Well, thank you, Jack, and it's greatly appreciated that you listened to my spewing of whatever. I do appreciate all of you. I really do. And by the way, for those of you listening to the audio right now and perhaps watching the YouTube video that I put out as a companion, I just started experimenting with doing some live streaming. And right now, in fact, I'm live streaming, and I think we have some folks in the chat room on my YouTube page. I set up a new channel called APG Live, and I try to remember before I start recording to send out a tweet. Right now we have 11 people watching. We have some people talking in the chat room, which is very cool. And my idea was not necessarily to have this live thing going on in the background for all of my shows being recorded, but I thought, well, why not? I mean, I have the capability of doing it, so why not turn the darn thing on while I'm recording live? You get to see all the foibles and all the behind-the-scenes stuff going on. But I really was planning on just having the ability to occasionally, like I'm in the hotel room and I'm working on something, and just turning it on and just kind of interacting with you, the community. So again, the YouTube channel is, I made a separate channel so that I don't junk up the regular channel that I use for my YouTube videos, and it's called APG space live exclamation point. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, and that will be the channel where I'll put all of the live recordings, and I'm not going to do anything to them. I'm not going to edit them. I'm not going to fancy them up in any way, because that will just add to my workload. And well, right now I just don't have any extra time to do that kind of thing. So yeah, as I said, right now we have about 10, 11 people watching. We have Kappa, Hilo Pilot 842, Tiffany, Kappa, I just mentioned him, Todd, Mr. Kilo Tango 1, Venkman 29, etc. I'm sure some others. Tom Seagraves, he was here, he had to leave. But it's just the kind of thing that, you might want to check in occasionally to see what's going on, see if I'm broadcasting anything live. It probably will not be interesting, but for instance, the other day when I started doing it, a good friend of mine and fellow Acme pilot, 717 captain now, Captain Scott Jones, joined me, and I sent him a link, and I had him on in the Hangout, and you could see him and the two of us interacting with the folks in the chat room, etc. So I plan on doing more and more of that in the future. So if you're interested, again, look for the link to the new channel in the show notes. And if you haven't subscribed to my Twitter feed or follow me on Twitter, it's Airline Pilot Guy. I'll usually put out a tweet on that, and also my Facebook page, Airline Pilot Guy, all one word. So there you go. So now to move on, let's. Sport Pilot Dave sent me a very short feedback, and the subject line is Maui Kahalui, and then he puts in the subject or in the message field OGG. And that was because Dr. Steph and I were wondering, what is the identifier for Kahalui Maui? And sure enough, Sport Pilot David came through and told us it's OGG. I used to know what that meant, but I've already forgotten. That little bit of memory in my brain has already been overwritten with something else, apparently. All right, Devin writes, interesting story. And the title of this article is, Why is United Airlines suing a 22-year-old? This is from CNN Money, December 31st, 2014. Patrick Gillespie. A young computer whiz from New York City has launched a site to help people buy cheap plane tickets. But an airline company and its travel partner want to shut him down. United Airlines and Orbitz filed a civil lawsuit last month against 22-year-old Akhtarer Zaman, who founded the website skiplagged.com last year. That's S-K-I-P, skiplagged, Lagged.com. I don't know if it's still operating now or not. You can check it out yourself. The site helps travelers find cheap flights by using a strategy called hidden city ticketing. The idea is that you buy an airline ticket that has a layover at your actual destination. Say you want to fly from New York City to San Francisco. You actually book a flight from New York to Lake Tahoe with a layover in San Francisco, and you get off in San Francisco without bothering to take the last leg of the flight to Lake Tahoe. This strategy only works if you book a one-way flight with no checked bags, because the flight is going to Lake Tahoe. If you checked your bag, that's where your bag's going to be, unless you want to make a trip up to Lake Tahoe. It's not like these tickets are the cheapest all the time, but they often are. In the lawsuit, United and Orbitz called Skiplagged unfair competition and allege that it is promoting strictly prohibited travel. And they want to recoup $75,000 in lost revenue from this 22-year-old. He said he knew a lawsuit was inevitable, but he points out that there is nothing illegal about his website. As a side note, I think that one of the tech shows I listened to were talking about this as well, and I think that this guy has set up some kind of a GoFundMe or one of those kind of crowdfunding sites to help with his defense in the trial. So anyway, according to Michael Boyd, president of Boyd Group International, indeed, hidden city ticketing is no secret among frequent flyers. He said that he worked as an American Airlines ticket agent 30 years ago and says he was trained at the airline to help customers find hidden city fares. Now, this is Jeff speaking. I really find that hard to believe. Your airline is going to train you to help passengers figure out a way to spend less money on your airline? I think maybe there's a typo in there, or maybe the person writing this article heard Michael Boyd incorrectly. That doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, if you want to read more about that, I'll put the link to the article from CNN Money in the show notes. Abner, and I think I mentioned this before, met with Abner for a quick visit, a quick APG one-on-one meetup in Boston. What was it, last month or a couple months ago, Abner? Anyway, he's a mail carrier in Boston, and he joined me for a beer, and I don't think he had one, though. I don't think he drinks, at the McCormick and Schmick's in the same building that the Park Plaza Hotel is in Boston, and got to meet with him and enjoy a little bit of time talking about aviation. And he sent this to me. Also, Mark at Flight Level 330 sent this as well. Hello from Boston again, Captain Jeff. Here's a video of a Cirrus landing off the coast of Hawaii when there was an issue with the ferry tanks. The CAPS, which stands for the Cirrus Airframe Parachute System, deployed, and we can see it landing in the water from a Coast Guard helicopter. If you don't hear from me in a week, send out a search party to look for me under the 80 feet of snow we were getting this later this evening. Yeah, so he sent this to me a few days ago, January 26th. Yeah, I guess they got a lot of snow, but not quite as much as they thought they were going to get. But so I hope everything is okay with you up there, Abner Bonilla, in Boston. Okay, so he sent me a link to this. I'll put a link to the YouTube video in the show notes. But again, this guy was ferrying an airplane from somewhere on the west coast, I don't remember now, to Maui, Hawaii, and he was about 200 and I don't know if that was his destination or not, but it's somewhere in the Hawaiian Islands. And he had to ditch his aircraft some 253 miles northeast of Maui on Sunday when a single-engine Cirrus SR-22 aircraft ran out of fuel. Apparently he had a ferry tank, an extra tank, where the seats in the back go normally, and there was some kind of a problem with the valve, the selector valve on the fuel tank. So apparently all that fuel was unusable, and he went as far as he could and didn't quite make it. The engine stopped running because that's what happens when you run out of fuel. And then you can see in the video, pretty cool, the panel popping off and the parachute coming out, and pretty cool system that Cirrus has come up with this airframe parachute system. So check it out. It's worth watching for sure. Thank you, Abner and Mark. Bhavesh, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that he sent me some wonderfully delicious Kenyan coffee and a very cool mug to go with it. And as I mentioned, he was out in Seattle, San Francisco first, and then up to Seattle to pick up an airplane for his airline. And he says, Captain Jeff, glad you enjoyed our Kenyan coffee. I'm still enjoying it, thank you. He's back in Nairobi now. We really loved Seattle. It's a very pretty city where the people are friendly. I never did get used to the coins there. He mentioned that that he doesn't really understand the coins in the United States because, it says it doesn't have the actual designation of how much they're worth on the coin itself, like most coins do. In our country, it just says dime, nickel, quarter, and you have to understand that a nickel is 5, a dime is 10, and a quarter is 25, etc. And he said that he'd just pull out all this change. He said, I'm not used to dealing with coins in my country. So he'd go to a coffee place and buy some coffee, and then he'd just hold his hand out with a bunch of coins in it. And he said, I hope that these people are honest, because he just tells them to pick out whatever they need to pick out. And then he sent me a picture, which I'll include in the show notes. Here's a picture of my wife and I on our brand new airplane. Looks like a 737 E-Tops equipped from his airline. And a very good-looking couple there, Bhavesh. Very cool. So again, I'll put that in the show notes. He says, back to reality and wanting help with some questions from Captain Jeff. Most of my flying is around the equator. Thus, we fly actual tracks the way they'd look on a map. So, if you want to fly from Nairobi to Lagos, Nigeria, it's about 2,300 nautical miles away to the west of us. So, you pick up a heading of, say, 290, and you keep it pretty much for the duration of the flight, and it will take you there. On the other hand, to fly from Seattle to Manchester, we fly a great circle track that doesn't quite fly the way it looks. Initial heading after takeoff is 050. By the time you're approaching Manchester, it's more like 140 degrees. I obviously Googled this, but would much appreciate a better explanation from you. As always, many thanks for the awesome podcast. For a change, I'm actually behind on them. Many thanks. And thank you, Babesh, for the question. And so I think the easiest way, I'm sure that Google and all the resources on the internet would do a better job of explaining this than I can, but I'll give it a shot. When we look at maps, normally we look at them in a two-dimensional view, like our charts or flat piece of paper, and they use something they call the Mercator projection, which is basically taking a three-dimensional track and then it's pressing it straight down into this two-dimensional flat piece of paper. And what happens is that it looks like a big curved line, especially when you're getting away from the equator, because when you're close to the equatorial region, the great circle routes and the actual flat two-dimensional routes pretty much look the same, as you mentioned. Going west to fly to Lagos, 290 heading pretty much stayed the same all along. The only thing that's going to change is the magnetic variation. But up in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, we get away from the equatorial region and get closer to the poles. When you flatten out the great circle routes that we fly, which are the shortest routes, it kind of looks like a big curved line. So most people say, well, why would you, for instance, when I used to fly to Honolulu from Atlanta, we would, sometimes head way up almost into Canada and then come down and then almost from the north going into Hawaii. And then sometimes, like the next week, we'd be going down over Mexico and the Baja Gulf of California and the Baja Peninsula, and kind of approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the east or even sometimes the southeast. And that was usually because of the winds. But so what we have to do is we have to take our flat map and then think about it in a three-dimensional way, in a globe. So remember those things we used to have? I don't know, maybe everybody still has a globe. So if you start off on your globe and you put your finger on Seattle, Washington, and then you kind of roll the globe around and find Manchester in the United Kingdom, and then you look at your two fingers that you're holding on the globe and you say, okay, if I had a string, what would be the shortest string or the shortest distance for me to fly from Seattle, Washington to Manchester in the UK? Well, would it be going straight across like due east across the United States, and then out straight over the Atlantic Ocean and then all the way around to the United Kingdom, Great Britain? No, it wouldn't be the shortest route. The shortest route would be to head up toward the upper end of that globe that you're holding and go way up north over Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and then coming almost, straight down from the south or from the north, heading south into Manchester, UK. So it looks really odd. So as you mentioned, he started off by with a heading of 04050, and by the time they were approaching Manchester, they were heading more in a southeasterly direction. And that is, again, because we are normally thinking of maps in a two-dimensional way, and you have to think about it in a three-dimensional way with your globe and your fingers and that little piece of string that you have. And you'll find that the shortest piece of string that you can come up with, the shortest route, would be that route that takes you up toward the top of the globe, toward the North Pole, and then back down. So I hope that made some sense. I gave it a shot anyway. Thanks again, Babesh, for the coffee and for your participation in the Airline Pilot Guy community. Rick sent this to me, Rick Ruiz, the 777 first officer, and he said, I believe you mentioned this is the EFB technology that Acme uses, which is the Surface 2 RT, and he sent me an article to Computer World And the name of the article, or the headline, is "All Signs Point to the Demise of Microsoft Surface 2 Tablet." Looks like Microsoft is getting rid of that technology and the ARM architecture, the type of chip that they have in it, and Windows RT, the operating system, which is an offshoot of Windows 8. Yeah, sure looks like it. In fact, I think that a lot of people would have said, even before Acme decided to use these things, that it looked like the end of the line was coming soon with this thing. So what does that mean for us at Acme and our electronic flight bags? Well, I think we'll have these things for another couple of years at least, because I think it's like a 3-year lease that we have with Microsoft. And I'll bet that when it comes time to upgrade our electronic flight bags or our tablets, we'll end up getting, I'm guessing, probably a Surface Pro, which is another tablet that Microsoft makes, but it's actually a full-blown real Intel chip in it, and actually runs a real Windows 8 operating system. So that's my guess. So I'm not too worried. Thanks, Rick. Luke sent a link to this very cool YouTube article, and he's in Australia, by the way. He says, something a little different that I would love to try, a full-size glider winch. And so check out the video in the show notes that Luke sent, and it is very cool. Basically, some folks that I think do have a YouTube channel, and they mostly deal with radio-controlled model aircraft and that kind of thing, but I guess they were invited by some company to come out and ride in their real glider, and they use a winch to launch the thing. It's very, very cool. So beautiful photography. So please check that out. Thank you, Luke. Dispatcher Greg just sent a quick piece of feedback here. It says, please thank Dispatch Mike for all his very detailed, for his very detailed answer. He's a very busy man over at Acme, and I appreciate the time it took for him to answer the question. Have a great day. So, Dispatcher Greg and Dispatcher Mike, the two of you, shaking hands, saluting, congratulating, etc. There you go. Let's see, what is this? Ross in England sent me an article about drones, and you know what? I don't know if... Oh, you know what? This actually came in before after I started recording. So let me do just a quick little peek at this article from BBC.com. Oh yeah, it deals with something we've already talked about in the show, the drone maker DJI, with the firmware upgrade, which will hopefully keep the DJI, I don't know why I want to keep saying DJI Phantom and other drones that they make from flying into restricted areas such as Washington, D.C. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Ross in England. And that is going to do it for today's show. I think we have caught up, believe it or not, with all of the feedback that you've sent since the last show. Again, thank you to all of you who have contributed to the Airline Pilot Guy show, the Coffee Fund. If you'd like to do so, head over to I wish I could get the APG.com website, but that URL is gone, long gone. So airlinepilotguy.com/coffee if you want to check out the Coffee Fund. And as I mentioned before, if you're watching the video on YouTube, head over to airlinepilotguy.com. Check out the show notes. A lot of links and stuff and pictures that I talked about on today's show are right there. And other information about ways you can listen to the show and get involved in the Airline Pilot Guy community. Join us. It's a lot of fun. What else? On Twitter, Airline Pilot Guy. On Facebook, Airline Pilot Guy. And I'm still, when I remember to do it, sometimes I forget, sorry, using the Swarm app, part of the Foursquare.com app world, where it kind of puts out my location, and I periodically will update that, and you can find that at whereiscaptainjeff WHEREISCAPTJEFF. And that's another Twitter account that I use for people who want to kind of keep up with my whereabouts. And I use that instead of the regular Airline Pilot Guy Twitter feed so that I don't junk up things for people that really could care less about where the heck I am. So, with that, I hope that everybody has a great rest of your week and a great weekend. And until next time, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care, and God bless.
Good day.